Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a nice idea if everyone can leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I lived alone in a small apartment on the second floor of a modest building. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where everyone minded their own business. I worked during the day and spent my evenings reading or watching television. My life was simple, predictable. It started about 2 months ago. I first noticed him on a Tuesday evening. I was washing dishes after dinner when I glanced out the window and saw a man standing across the street. He was positioned directly opposite my building, his face tilted upward, eyes fixed on my window. He stood motionless, hands in his pockets, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. I remember feeling a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off. Perhaps he was waiting for someone or just passing by. But he was there the next night. And the night after that. Always at the same time, always staring up at my window. I began to feel uneasy. I stopped opening my curtains in the evening, hoping that if he couldn't see me, he would lose interest and go away. But even with the curtains drawn, I could sense his presence. I would peek out occasionally, and there he was, standing in the same spot, unwavering. I confided in a friend about the situation. She suggested I contact the police, but I hesitated. What would I tell them? That a man was standing on a public street, looking up at my window? He hadn't threatened me or tried to approach me. I felt silly making a fuss over what could be nothing. One evening, I decided to confront him. I mustered all my courage, went downstairs, and stepped outside. But by the time I reached the street, he was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I stood there for a few moments, feeling a mix of relief and frustration, before heading back inside. The following nights, he didn't appear. I began to relax, thinking it was over. Perhaps he had moved on, found someone else to watch, or maybe it had all been a misunderstanding. Life returned to its normal rhythm. Then, one night, everything changed. I had gone to bed around 11 p.m. The apartment was silent except for the occasional creaks and groans typical of old buildings. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard a faint noise. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the sound of a door latch being tested. My heart began to race. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then, I heard it again, clearer this time, the unmistakable sound of my front door handle turning. Panic surged through me. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, my fingers trembling. I dialed 999 and whispered to the operator that someone was trying to enter my apartment. She told me to stay on the line and remain quiet. Officers were on their way. The handle stopped moving, but then I heard soft footsteps, not from outside, but inside my apartment. My blood ran cold. He was in my home. I locked my bedroom door as silently as I could and pressed my ear against it. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving through my living room, then into the kitchen. I could hear drawers being opened, items being moved. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to stifle my sobs. The operator's voice was a lifeline, keeping me grounded. She assured me that help was near. Minutes felt like hours. Then, I heard the most terrifying sound, the creak of the floorboard right outside my bedroom door. He was just on the other side. I held my breath, clutching the phone like a lifeline. The handle of my bedroom door moved slightly, testing. I backed away, looking for something, anything to defend myself. My eyes landed on a heavy lamp on the bedside table. I grabbed it, holding it aloft, ready to swing. Suddenly, there was a loud banging on the front door. "Police!" "Open up," a voice commanded. The intruder's footsteps retreated rapidly. I heard the front door open and then slam shut. I didn't know if he had escaped or been caught. Moments later, there was a knock on my bedroom door. "Miss, it's the police. You're safe now." I opened the door to find two officers standing there, concern etched on their faces. I collapsed into their arms, relief washing over me. They explained that they had apprehended a man fleeing the building. He matched the description I had given of a man who had been watching me. They found a knife in his possession and a rope. He had been stalking me for weeks, learning my routines, waiting for the right moment. The officers stayed with me as I gave my statement. They assured me that he was in custody and wouldn't be able to harm me. They also recommended some security measures for my apartment, like installing additional locks and an alarm system. I couldn't sleep in my apartment that night. A friend offered her place, and I gladly accepted. The reality of how close I had come to harm was overwhelming. The thought that he had been inside, that he had been watching me for weeks, sent shivers down my spine. In the following days, I took all the recommended precautions. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and even adopted a dog for companionship and protection. The man was charged with attempted burglary and stalking. I attended every court hearing, facing him with a newfound strength. He was sentenced to several years in prison. The experience left scars, both seen and unseen. I became more vigilant, always aware of my surroundings. But with time, therapy, and support from friends and family, I began to heal. My home became my sanctuary once more, and I refused to let fear dictate my life. Looking back, I realized the importance of trusting one's instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. I was lucky to escape unharmed, but I learned a valuable lesson about personal safety and the importance of seeking help when needed. I picked up the pills on a Thursday. It was supposed to help with the sleep problems I had been having. I had only gone to the doctor once, explained I couldn't fall asleep, and when I did, I kept waking up. He didn't ask many questions, just nodded, typed some stuff into his computer, and said he'd send something to the pharmacy that would help me reset. The pharmacist didn't say much either. Just asked my name, checked my ID, then handed me the white paper bag with the receipt stapled on. I didn't look at the label. I trusted they knew what they were doing. That night, I took the first pill right before bed. It kicked in fast. I felt it almost right away. But it wasn't just drowsiness. It was like my body shut off, not drifted off. One minute I was in bed, and the next it was morning. No dreams, no waking up. Just gone, and then back. It should have felt like relief, but it didn't. The next day, I felt strange. My limbs were heavy, and I had this weird buzzing under my skin. My mouth was dry. I figured it was just a strong dose. Maybe my body wasn't used to it yet. That second night, I hesitated before taking it. But I didn't want to go back to lying awake for hours. I took half instead. This time, I didn't black out. I remember lying there and feeling my chest get tight. Not like a heart attack. More like something was pressing down on me, but inside, like my lungs were too small. I could breathe, but I had to focus on it. Then my vision got fuzzy. I sat up and tried to shake it off, but my legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I crawled to the bathroom and threw up in the sink. There was a strange taste in my mouth, metallic and sour, and my hands were shaky. I went back to bed without taking the other half. The whole next day, I was jittery. I couldn't eat. I felt like my heart was skipping beats. I checked my blood pressure with one of those machines at the grocery store, and it was sky high. I stood there staring at the numbers, unsure if it was broken or if I should be in a hospital. I went home and took out the bottle. That's when I noticed the name. It wasn't mine. It was close, same first name, same last initial. But not me. I froze. My throat got tight. The label had a different date of birth. The pills were for someone else entirely. I tried calling the pharmacy. It rang and rang. Finally, someone picked up. I explained everything, told them I had someone else's prescription. The guy on the phone sounded confused, asked me to read the prescription number. When I did, he went quiet for a few seconds, then asked me to come in as soon as I could. He said they'd take care of it. No apology. No explanation. I drove there right away, still shaking. When I got to the counter, a different person was there. She looked at the bottle, her face stiff, and told me to wait while she got the pharmacist. He came out from the back, older man, glasses slipping down his nose. He looked at the bottle, then at me, then said there had been a mix-up. Simple error. 2 similar names in the system. I asked what the pills were. He didn't answer right away. Just told me again that it was a mistake and asked if I'd taken any. I said yes, 2 doses, 1.5 pills total. He told me they were for a different condition entirely. He didn't say what, not at first. I pressed him until he admitted they were for someone with a serious psychiatric disorder. I asked if I was in danger. He didn't answer that either. Just said I should go see a doctor, just in case. I left with my stomach in knots. I didn't feel safe. I felt like something was still in my system. Like something had been scrambled in my head. That night, I didn't take anything. But I couldn't sleep. Not because I wasn't tired. I was terrified. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was sinking into something I wouldn't come back from. Around 3 a.m., I started sweating. My muscles ached like I'd run miles. My thoughts were spinning. I started hearing things, little sounds that didn't make sense. Whispers. Maybe the pipes. Maybe the building creaking. I couldn't tell anymore. I couldn't think straight. I called emergency. I told them what happened. They told me to go to the hospital right away. I could barely stand. My legs kept twitching. My jaw clenched on its own. I drove anyway, hunched over the wheel like I was 100 years old. At the hospital, they ran tests. They put me on fluids and kept me there overnight. I asked one of the nurses what was happening to me. She said I was having a reaction. My body wasn't supposed to be on those meds. Especially not without being monitored. She didn't say the name of the drug, but later, I saw it written on a clipboard at the edge of the bed. I memorized the name and looked it up once I was home again. It wasn't just for sleep. It was a heavy-duty antipsychotic. Not something you give out lightly. The list of side effects made my skin crawl. Heart issues. Seizures. Neurological damage. Some permanent. I could have died. If I'd taken the full dose a second night, maybe I would have. My blood pressure had been in the stroke range. And they didn't even know how much damage was done. I called a lawyer. I made reports. The pharmacy denied most of it. said I must have mixed up the bottles, even though the receipt they stapled showed the wrong name. They said there was no proof the mistake was on their end. Just confusion. A rare incident. I saved the bottle. I took photos. I wrote everything down. But they still tried to make it seem like I was the one who caused it. That I hadn't read the label. That I should have checked. I don't trust pharmacies anymore. I check everything now. The pills, the color, the shape, the name on the bottle, the dosage. I read the insert even if I've had the drug before. I don't just trust the people behind the counter. Not after this. I'm still having side effects. The headaches come and go. My vision blurs sometimes. Some nights I feel my heart flutter, like it forgets how to beat for a second. The doctor says it might fade with time, or it might not. All I know is I lived through it. Barely. All because someone didn't take 2 seconds to read a label. I had just finished shopping at the local supermarket. It was late, around 10 p.m., and the parking lot was nearly empty. The overhead lights cast long shadows, and the air was crisp. I loaded my bags into the trunk, got into the driver's seat, and started the car. The familiar hum of the engine was comforting after a long day. As I pulled out onto the main road, the streets were quiet. The occasional car passed by, but for the most part, I was alone. The rhythmic sound of the tires on the asphalt was almost hypnotic. I turned on the radio to break the silence, tuning into a soft rock station. The gentle melodies filled the car, providing a sense of normalcy. About 10 minutes into my drive, I heard a faint cough. At first, I thought it came from the radio, perhaps part of a song or a background noise from the studio. But then, I heard it again, clearer this time. My heart began to race. I glanced at the rearview mirror, but the dim lighting inside the car made it hard to see the back seat clearly. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just my imagination playing tricks on me after a long day. But the unease settled deep in my stomach. I reached up and turned on the interior light. As the car illuminated, my eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. A figure was lying across the back seat, partially covered by a dark blanket. The person's face was obscured, but I could see the rise and fall of their chest. They were breathing. Panic surged through me. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. I had heard stories about situations like this, urban legends warning people to always check their back seats before getting into their cars. I never thought it would happen to me. My mind raced with questions. Who was this person? What did they want? How did they get into my car? I knew I had to act quickly but carefully. I couldn't let this person know that I was aware of their presence. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. I reached for my phone, which was mounted on the dashboard, and pretended to adjust the GPS. Instead, I dialed 999, pressing the call button without bringing the phone to my ear. I hoped the operator would hear what was happening and send help. Keeping my eyes on the road, I spoke as calmly as I could, as if I were talking to someone on the other end of the line. Hey, I'm on my way home now. Should be there in about 10 minutes. I paused, as if listening. Yeah, I stopped by the store. Got everything we need. I hoped that by pretending to be on the phone with someone, the person in the back seat might think twice about doing anything rash. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. The operator must have realized something was wrong. I heard a faint voice coming from the phone. "Ma'am, are you in danger? Can you speak?" I couldn't respond directly without alerting the intruder. Instead, I continued my pretend conversation. "Yeah, I'm just passing by the old gas station now. Almost there. I saw a petrol station up ahead, its lights bright against the dark night. I made a split-second decision and turned into the station, pulling up to one of the pumps. I put the car in park but left the engine running. "I'm just stopping to get some fuel," I said, still pretending to talk on the phone. "I'll be home soon." I unbuckled my seatbelt slowly, trying to keep my movements as smooth as possible. I opened the driver's side door and stepped out, keeping the phone to my ear. As soon as I was clear of the car, I took off running towards the station's entrance. The attendant behind the counter looked up, startled, as I burst through the door. I slammed the lock button on my key fob, hoping it would prevent the intruder from escaping or following me. I turned to the attendant, my breath coming in gasps. "Please," I managed to say, "call the police. There's someone in my car." The attendant's eyes widened, but he quickly picked up the phone and dialed. I could hear him explaining the situation, giving them the location of the station. Minutes felt like hours as we waited. I kept my eyes on my car, half expecting the person to emerge and run. But the car remained still, the engine idling softly. Soon, flashing blue lights filled the parking lot. 2 police cars pulled in, officers exiting with caution. I ran out to meet them, pointing to my vehicle. "There's someone in the back seat," I told them, my voice shaking. The officers approached the car, one on each side. They peered into the windows, hands resting on their holsters. One of them tried the rear passenger door. It was locked. He signaled for me to unlock the car. With trembling fingers, I pressed the unlock button on my key fob. The officer opened the door swiftly, stepping back and drawing his weapon. "Come out slowly," he commanded. "Hands where we can see them." There was a tense moment of silence. Then, the blanket shifted, and a man sat up, his hands raised. He looked disheveled, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The officers acted quickly, pulling him out of the car and restraining him. They placed him in handcuffs and led him to one of the patrol cars. One officer stayed behind to talk to me. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, his tone gentle. I nodded, though I didn't feel all right. My whole body was trembling, and I felt like I might collapse. "Do you know this man?" he continued. I shook my head. "No. I have no idea who he is or how he got into my car." The officer explained that the man appeared to be homeless and possibly suffering from mental health issues. He had no weapons on him and claimed he was just looking for a place to sleep. "We'll take him in and get him the help he needs," the officer assured me. "In the meantime, it's a good reminder to always lock your car doors and stay vigilant." I thanked the officers and watched as they drove away, the man in the back seat of the patrol car. I sat in my car for a long moment, trying to process what had happened. The reality of how vulnerable I had been sank in, and tears streamed down my face. From that night on, I made it a habit to always check my back seat before getting into my car, no matter how safe the area seemed. The experience left me shaken, but I was grateful to have escaped unharmed. I got the cameras because I live alone, and there was a break in a few houses down the road. I work nights sometimes, and it just felt safer knowing I could check in on things while I was gone. I went with a popular brand. I put one facing the front door, one in the living room, one in the hallway near my bedroom, and one in the bedroom itself. They were motion activated. They had night vision. They stored recordings to a cloud account. I set them all up myself. I followed the steps like the box said. They worked fine. The first time something felt off, it was small. The front door camera would blink red when I walked by, like it was on and recording. Then I'd check the app and there'd be nothing there. No clips saved. It happened again a few days later. Then I noticed it with the hallway camera. The little light blinked like it was recording, but when I checked my phone, there was no notification. I told myself maybe it was a delay, or a glitch, or the Wi-Fi. I didn't think much of it at the time. It started getting weirder when I saw a clip pop up from my bedroom camera one afternoon while I was watching TV. I wasn't in the bedroom. I was in the living room. I opened the app. The clip was 15 seconds long. The thumbnail showed my bed. I tapped play. It was me. Lying in bed. Asleep. The timestamp said 3:47 a.m. the night before. I didn't remember saving it. I didn't even know it had recorded anything. There wasn't supposed to be motion when I was asleep. I keep the door closed. I sleep alone. I turned the volume up. There was nothing but the sound of my breathing and a slight hum, maybe the AC. I watched the whole clip. I was just lying there. But it felt wrong. I don't know how to explain it. Like it wasn't supposed to exist. I checked the rest of the clips on the app. That was the only one from that night. Nothing before or after. I deleted it. I turned off the camera in the bedroom. I didn't like the idea of it recording me while I slept. The next night I kept the bedroom door shut and locked, which I usually didn't bother with. I didn't sleep well. Every sound made me sit up and look around. I kept checking my phone to see if any clips appeared. Nothing did. I tried to calm down. I told myself it was just a random motion trigger. Maybe the blankets moved or something. 2 days later, I got home from work and opened the app just to check. There was another clip. Again, from the bedroom. I had turned the camera off. I was sure I had. The clip was from that morning, about an hour before I woke up. It showed me lying in bed again. Same angle. Same lighting. I watched it through, heart beating fast. At the very end, there was a tiny sound. A soft click. Like the door handle turning. Then the clip ended. I didn't know what to do. I sat on the edge of the couch with the clip paused, trying to breathe. I went into the bedroom and checked the door. Still locked. Then I looked at the camera itself. The little light was off. I opened the app and checked the settings. It said the camera was disabled, but it had recorded me anyway. I unplugged all of them. Every camera. I took out the memory cards and reset the whole system. I changed the password on the app. I even called the customer service line and asked if there had been any known hacks. They said no. They told me to update the firmware and check my router security. I did all that. For a week, nothing happened. No clips. No blinking lights. I kept the bedroom door locked every night. I slept with the light on. Then a clip showed up again. I was at work in the break room, scrolling on my phone during lunch. The app pinged. Motion detected, bedroom. I felt sick. I didn't even tap it. I just stared at the screen. The thumbnail showed my face, asleep, pillow half covering it. I went to the manager and said I needed to leave. told him it was an emergency. When I got home, the apartment was quiet. The lights were off, just like I left them. I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening. Then I walked through every room. Nothing was touched. Nothing was missing. I went into the bedroom. I checked under the bed. In the closet. The window was locked from the inside. The door was still locked. I opened the app again. This time I watched the clip with the sound off. I couldn't take the thought of hearing anything. It was me sleeping. Just like before. But then, around the 10-second mark, a shadow passed over the corner of the frame. It moved too fast to make out a shape. But it was there. I turned off the phone. I sat on the bed and just stared at the wall. My mouth was dry. I felt like throwing up. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed up in the living room with the lights on and a baseball bat next to me. I kept checking the hallway, the front door, the windows. Every creak in the floor made me flinch. Nothing happened. The next day, I went to a hardware store and bought new locks. I changed all of them. I bought a second deadbolt for the front door and a bar for the sliding glass door in the kitchen. I didn't turn the cameras back on. I didn't even plug them in. I thought about throwing them out, but something made me keep them, like I wanted proof if anything happened again. 2 nights later, I got another notification. I had forgotten to uninstall the app from my phone. It pinged once while I was brushing my teeth. Motion detected, living room. I stared at the notification without tapping it. Then I opened the clip. This time, it didn't show me. It showed the couch. Empty. The room was dark. For the first few seconds, nothing moved. Then something passed in front of the camera. A leg. A person walking. Just the edge of a pant leg, and then it was gone. I ran to the living room. I flipped on the lights. There was no one there. I checked the front door. Locked. I checked every room again. Closets. Windows. All locked. I checked the sliding glass door. Still barred. I don't know how they got in. Or out. That was it for me. I took the cameras down, all of them. I smashed the bedroom one with a hammer and threw the rest in a dumpster behind a gas station. I didn't want to risk anyone watching through them anymore. I even stopped using my phone at home. I got rid of the smart TV too. I don't trust anything with a camera now. I moved a month later. Broke my lease, paid the penalty. I didn't even pack everything. I just took the basics and left the rest. I never saw another clip again. But I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and stare at the door until the sun comes up. I keep a chair under the doorknob now. Every night. Just in case. I was watching my neighbor's kid for the weekend. They were out of town for some wedding, and I'd done it before. His name's Max. He's 5. A quiet kid, not hard to manage. They packed him lunches, left a note with a schedule, emergency numbers. I live in the same building, just 2 floors down. That Sunday was sunny and warm, so I decided to take him to the park down the street. It wasn't crowded, a few families and some joggers. Max wanted to go on the swings. I pushed him gently, letting him go higher each time. He was laughing. I had a small backpack with snacks and tissues and his water bottle. After the swings, we sat on a bench. He was eating apple slices when a man walked by. I noticed he looked at me longer than normal. I didn't think much of it at first. Then I realized he was staring. He passed us but didn't keep walking. He stood behind a tree, watching. I kept Max close. I told him we'd go see the ducks by the pond. As I got up, the man stepped out from behind the tree and walked over. He didn't say hello. He looked straight at Max. "Are you okay?" he asked him. Max looked confused. He nodded. The man looked at me. "Where's his mother?" I told him I was just watching Max for the weekend. I tried to sound calm. The man looked me over from head to toe. "You don't look like family," he said. I said I wasn't, just a neighbor. He didn't budge. He asked where the parents were. I said they were at a wedding out of state. He asked if I had permission to be with the boy. I said yes, of course. Then he asked to see proof. I told him I didn't carry papers like that. Who would? He started shaking his head. Max held my hand tighter. I could feel his fingers digging in. "You need to stay right here," the man said. "I'm calling the police." He took out his phone. I said he was overreacting. He didn't respond. I turned to Max and told him it was fine. We were going to go. As soon as I started to move, the man stepped in front of me and yelled, "She's trying to leave." Other people nearby looked up. A woman with a stroller walked over. 2 joggers stopped. The man told them I was trying to take a child who wasn't mine. I said again I was just a babysitter. The woman asked Max, "Is this your mommy?" Max looked scared. He said no. I said that didn't mean anything. I already told them I was babysitting. One of the joggers asked if I had the parents' number. I did. It was written on the schedule sheet at my place. Not in my pocket. Not on me. The man was still on the phone with 911. I heard him say, "White female, early 30s, dark hair, wearing jeans and a gray hoodie, trying to abduct a child." My ears started ringing. I crouched next to Max and told him we were going home now. He was getting scared. I picked him up. That was when someone grabbed my arm. "Don't you move," the man said. I said to let go of me, that he was making a mistake. He pulled my arm harder. Max started crying. I shouted for him to stop, that he was hurting me. A man from a nearby bench came over. He told me to calm down. I said I wasn't doing anything wrong. Another woman stood near me like she was waiting for me to run. Sirens came fast. A police car pulled up onto the curb. 2 officers got out and came straight toward me. The man pointed. "That's her. She tried to take the kid." I started to speak, but they told me to put the boy down. I did. Max clung to my hoodie. One officer crouched beside him and asked if I was his mom. Max said no. I said again I was the babysitter. They asked for my ID. I gave it to them. The man kept talking. He said he saw me acting strange. He said the boy looked scared. He said I tried to flee. I told the officers we were just leaving the park, that I had every right to. They asked for the parents' number. I gave their names and apartment number and said to check the building. The officers took Max aside and gave him a bottle of water from their car. He was still crying, sniffling. I couldn't go near him. One officer kept asking me the same things again and again. How long I'd known the family. Why I didn't have a written note. If I had any photos of me with the boy. I didn't. I didn't think I needed them. I asked if they could go to my building. If they could check the emergency contact list in the office. The officers said they were trying to confirm the story. They kept me standing by the police car. People were watching, taking videos. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I just kept saying the same thing. I'm not a kidnapper. I live at 2F. Their names are Taryn and James Myers. Their kid is Max. They asked me to babysit. A third officer arrived and went to my building. He had the names and address. I waited. I could barely stay standing. One of the officers gave me a bottle of water, but I couldn't drink it. I felt sick. After what felt like forever, the third officer came back. He nodded to the others. One of them walked over to Max and asked him again who I was. Max said, "That's Kate. She watches me when Mommy and Daddy go away." I started crying. I didn't mean to. I couldn't help it. They let me sit down. They apologized. They said the man thought he was doing the right thing. I didn't say anything. I couldn't even look at him. He was standing by the swings, arms crossed, like he was proud of himself. The officers asked if I wanted to press charges for being grabbed. I said no. I just wanted to leave. They asked if I needed a ride home. I said no. I carried Max the whole way back. He didn't say much. I think he didn't understand why everyone was yelling. Back in the apartment, I called his parents. I told them everything. They were angry. Said they'd talked to the building manager and the police. Said I should have called them from the park. I didn't think I'd have time. I didn't go out again with Max. I stayed inside until they came back. I haven't babysat for them since. Not because I'm angry at them. I just can't go back to that park. I know the man probably thought he was helping. But he didn't ask questions. He didn't listen. He just decided I was guilty. And everyone else followed. I still get scared when someone stares too long at me in public. I feel like they're trying to figure out if I belong there. If the kid I'm with is really mine. I don't even have kids. Sometimes I still think about what would have happened if Max hadn't remembered my name. If the officer hadn't gone to my building. If no one believed me. I didn't do anything wrong. But for almost an hour, everyone thought I did. And I couldn't stop it. Moving into a new neighborhood is always a mix of excitement and anxiety. My husband, Tom, and I had finally found a cozy house in a quiet suburb. The tree-lined streets and well-kept lawns seemed perfect for us. We were eager to settle in and make it our home. Our next-door neighbor was a man named Mr. Johnson. He appeared to be in his late 50s or early 60s, with graying hair and a reserved demeanor. Our first meeting was brief. He greeted us with a polite nod and a few words about the neighborhood. He mentioned he had lived there for several years and enjoyed the peace and quiet. Over the next few weeks, we had occasional interactions with Mr. Johnson. He was always courteous but kept to himself. He would wave from his porch or exchange a few words about the weather. There was nothing unusual about him, just a quiet man living his life. One evening, Tom and I were watching a documentary about unsolved crimes. As the program delved into various cases, a segment about a longtime fugitive came on. The man's face flashed on the screen, and I felt a jolt of recognition. The fugitive, wanted for serious crimes committed decades ago, bore a striking resemblance to Mr. Johnson. I couldn't shake the feeling. The similarities were too strong to ignore. I told Tom about my suspicion. He was skeptical at first, suggesting that many people can look alike. But the more we discussed it, the more convinced we became that our neighbor might be living under an assumed identity. We decided to do some research. We found old news articles and photos of the fugitive. The resemblance was uncanny. Details about the fugitive's age, physical description, and even certain habits matched what we knew about Mr. Johnson. Unsure of what to do, we debated our next steps. Confronting Mr. Johnson directly seemed dangerous. We didn't know what he might be capable of. After much deliberation, we decided to contact the authorities anonymously. We provided them with the information we had gathered and our suspicions. Days passed without any noticeable change. We went about our daily routines, though the tension was palpable. Then, one afternoon, unmarked cars arrived in the neighborhood. Law enforcement officers approached Mr. Johnson's house. From our window, we watched as they knocked on his door. He answered, appearing calm. After a brief conversation, they escorted him to one of the cars and drove away. News broke shortly after that Mr. Johnson was indeed the fugitive who had been on the run for years. He had been living under a false name, blending into communities to avoid capture. The revelation sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Neighbors expressed disbelief that the quiet man they had known was capable of such deception. Reflecting on the experience, Tom and I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that he was apprehended without incident, but also a lingering unease. It was unsettling to realize how little we knew about the people around us. The incident served as a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes, danger lurks closer than we think. I had a late meeting at work and didn't finish until around 9 p.m. The office was nearly empty as I gathered my things and requested a ride home through the app. The driver, Mark, arrived promptly in a silver sedan. He was a middle-aged man with short brown hair and a friendly demeanor. The ride was uneventful. We exchanged some small talk about the weather and traffic. He dropped me off at my apartment complex without incident. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Good morning, Emily. It's Mark, your driver from last night. Hope you slept well." I was taken aback. I hadn't given him my number. The rideshare app uses anonymized numbers for communication, so drivers shouldn't have access to passengers' personal contact information. I replied, "How did you get my number?" He responded, "I have my ways. Just wanted to check in on you." Feeling uneasy, I decided not to engage further and blocked the number. I reported the incident to the rideshare company through their app, detailing the unauthorized contact. They assured me they would investigate the matter. Over the next few days, I received friend requests on my social media accounts from profiles I didn't recognize. The usernames were variations of Mark and included details that made it clear it was the same person. I tightened my privacy settings and blocked the accounts, but the persistence was alarming. One evening, as I was leaving work, I noticed a silver sedan parked across the street. It looked like the same car Mark had driven. I couldn't be certain, but the coincidence was unsettling. I hurried to a nearby cafe and waited for a friend to pick me up instead of calling a rideshare. The following morning, another text came through from a different number. "Why are you avoiding me, Emily? We should see each other again." Panic set in. I contacted the rideshare company again, emphasizing the severity of the situation. They reiterated that they were looking into it but couldn't provide details about their internal processes. Feeling vulnerable, I decided to involve the police. I provided them with all the information, the ride details, the unauthorized messages, the social media attempts, and the sightings of the silver sedan. They took my statements seriously and advised me to be cautious, suggesting I vary my routines and stay in public places as much as possible. A week later, the police informed me that they had identified Mark. His real name was not registered with the rideshare company. He had used false credentials to become a driver. They arrested him on charges of harassment and for violating the terms of his agreement with the rideshare service. The rideshare company reached out to apologize and offered support, stating they had tightened their vetting processes to prevent such incidents in the future. The experience left me shaken. I became more vigilant about my personal information and the services I used. I also started sharing my ride details with friends and family for added security. It's terrifying to think how easily someone can bypass systems meant to protect users. I was fortunate that the situation was resolved without physical harm, but the emotional toll was significant. I hope my experience serves as a cautionary tale for others to remain alert and proactive about their safety. I had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to a quiet evening at home. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed that my front door was wide open. My heart sank. I was certain I had locked it that morning. I sat in my car for a moment, considering my options. Maybe I had forgotten to close it properly. Or perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me after such a tiring day. Cautiously, I stepped out of the car and approached the house. The porch light flickered slightly, casting uneasy shadows on the ground. I hesitated at the threshold, listening intently. The house was silent. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The living room appeared untouched. The television was off, the furniture was in its usual place, and nothing seemed out of order. I moved to the kitchen. The same story. No signs of forced entry, no drawers pulled open, no broken windows. It was as if the house had been frozen in time since I left that morning. I began to relax, convincing myself that I must have left the door open by mistake. As I turned to head upstairs, something caught my eye. There, on the beige carpet leading from the front door into the hallway, were muddy footprints. They were distinct, each toe and heel clearly imprinted. The trail led deeper into the house but did not return. There were no footprints leading back out. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had entered my home. But where were they now? My mind raced through possibilities. Had they left through a back door? Were they still inside? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, ready to call the police. But then I paused. What if I was overreacting? Perhaps a neighbor had come looking for me and left when they realized I wasn't home. But that didn't explain the footprints only leading in. Summoning courage I didn't know I had, I decided to search the house. I moved quietly, avoiding the creaky floorboards as best as I could. The first floor was clear. The back door was locked, and all the windows were secure. that left the upstairs. I ascended the staircase slowly, each step amplifying my heartbeat. At the top, the hallway stretched out, doors to the bedrooms and bathroom closed. I started with the bathroom. Empty. The guest room. Empty. Finally, I stood before my bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking through. I pushed it open gently. The room was dim, the curtains drawn. Everything seemed in place. My bed was made, the closet door shut, the dresser undisturbed. But then, I noticed the closet door. It was closed, but not completely. A tiny gap revealed darkness within. I approached, every instinct telling me to run, to get out and call for help. But I had to know. I had to be sure. With a trembling hand, I grasped the closet door handle and yanked it open. Inside, among my hanging clothes, a man crouched. His eyes were wide with shock, mirroring my own. He was disheveled, his clothes dirty and torn. Before either of us could react, he lunged past me, knocking me off balance. I stumbled but quickly regained my footing. I chased after him as he bolted down the stairs. By the time I reached the front door, he was already disappearing into the night. Shaken, I locked the door and called the police. They arrived promptly, taking my statement and examining the scene. The officers noted the muddy footprints and the disturbed closet. They speculated that the intruder had entered during the day, perhaps thinking the house was empty, and hid when he heard me return. The police assured me they would patrol the area and advised me to be cautious. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the house made me jump, every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking figure. In the following days, I had a security system installed, complete with cameras and motion detectors. The sense of violation lingered, but I was determined to reclaim my sense of safety. The experience taught me a harsh lesson about vigilance and the illusion of security. My home, once a sanctuary, had been invaded. But I was fortunate. I was unharmed, and the intruder was gone. Still, the memory of those muddy footprints leading in, and only in, remains etched in my mind. I had been seeing this guy, Alex, for a few weeks. He seemed nice, polite, funny, and attentive. That evening, we decided to try a new restaurant downtown. The place was cozy, with dim lighting and soft music. We were seated at a small table near the back. After ordering our meals, I excused myself to use the restroom. The hallway leading to the restrooms was narrow and slightly darker than the main dining area. As I approached the ladies' room, I noticed a man standing near the entrance. He was tall, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. He glanced at me briefly, then looked away. I felt a slight unease but brushed it off, assuming he was waiting for someone. I entered the restroom and went into one of the stalls. As I was washing my hands, the door opened. I expected to see another woman, but it was the man from the hallway. He stepped inside and locked the door behind him. My heart began to race. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is the ladies' room." He ignored my comment, taking a step closer. "I just want to talk," he said, his voice low and rough. I backed up until I felt the cold sink against my lower back. "Please leave," I demanded, my voice rising. He shook his head slowly. "You don't need to be scared. I won't hurt you." But his presence, his actions, contradicted his words. I glanced around, looking for anything I could use as a weapon or a way to escape. The restroom was small, with no windows and only one exit, the door he was blocking. "Let me out," I said firmly, trying to mask the fear in my voice. He took another step closer, and I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. I said I just wanted to talk. Thinking quickly, I remembered my phone in my back pocket. I reached for it, but he noticed and lunged, grabbing my wrist. "Don't," he warned, his grip tightening. I winced in pain but refused to let him see my fear. "If you don't let me go, I'll scream," I threatened. He smirked. "Go ahead. The music out there is pretty loud. Think anyone will hear you?" Panic surged through me. I had to think of another way out. "My boyfriend is waiting for me," I said, hoping the mention of Alex would deter him. "He'll come looking if I'm gone too long." The man's smirk faded slightly, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. I seized the moment. "He's a cop," I lied. "He'll know something's wrong." He hesitated, his grip loosening just enough for me to yank my wrist free. I darted to the door, unlocking it swiftly and pulling it open. Without looking back, I ran down the hallway and back into the dining area. Breathless and shaken, I reached our table. Alex looked up, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" he asked, standing up. I grabbed his arm. "We need to leave. Now." Sensing the urgency in my voice, he didn't question me. We hurried out of the restaurant and into the night. Once we were a safe distance away, I told him everything. He wanted to go back and confront the man, but I insisted we just go home. The thought of returning, of seeing that man again, was too much. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, felt his grip on my wrist. The realization of how vulnerable I had been, how easily things could have escalated, haunted me. The following day, I reported the incident to the police. They took my statement and said they would look into it, but I never heard back about any developments. The experience left me wary. I became more cautious, always aware of my surroundings. The world didn't feel as safe as it once did. And the simple act of going to a restaurant's restroom would never feel the same again. I've been riding the same train every morning for years. It's part of my routine, like brushing my teeth or having coffee before work. I sit in the same spot every time, a corner seat by the window, the one that gives me a perfect view of the station and the tracks as we pull out. I didn't think much of it at first, but after a few weeks, I started to notice him. He always stood in the same spot on the platform. Every single morning, he'd be there, waiting, looking up at the train schedule or sometimes staring into the distance. He didn't look strange, or at least, he didn't at first. Just a regular man, maybe in his late 30s, wearing a jacket, a bit scruffy around the edges but nothing out of the ordinary. At first, I didn't think it meant anything. Maybe he took the same train too. But then it started to get odd. The next few mornings, I saw him on the same train, always in the same carriage, always standing by the door as if he was waiting for something. Every day, he'd board the train a few minutes before me. Same exact spot. Same look. The first few days, I told myself it was just coincidence. People take the same train. It's not unusual. But then I noticed something more unsettling. One morning, I caught a glimpse of him sitting in the same spot I always sat in, just across the aisle. He was looking out the window, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was aware of me. It felt like he was waiting for me to notice, like he was making sure I knew he was there. After a week of this, I couldn't stop myself from looking for him every morning. He became a fixture of my commute. At some point, I realized that he was always behind me when I got off the train. It was subtle, but I began to feel it. He was walking at the same pace, just a step behind me. I tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a coincidence. But the pattern kept repeating. Every day, the same train, the same spot. He would always board just before me, sit in the same place, and follow me off the train. I couldn't understand it, but I started getting nervous. I stopped looking over my shoulder, but I could feel his presence behind me. It was a heavy, suffocating feeling, like someone was always watching me. One day, I decided to change things up. I wasn't going to take the usual route, the usual train, and sit in the usual spot. I needed to break the cycle, to see if this man was just a coincidence, or if he was somehow following me. So, I took a different train. The new train was a little less crowded, and it felt like a fresh start. I took a seat by the door, away from the window. I tried to act casual, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about him. Had I made the right choice? Was he really following me, or was I just paranoid? When I reached my stop, I got off the train and headed toward the exit. I breathed a little easier. No sign of him. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he wasn't stalking me after all. But then, as I walked toward the exit, I saw him. He was standing by the door, looking out, exactly where I had just stepped off. He was looking at me. He wasn't on the train I had just ridden. He wasn't even supposed to be on this route. I froze for a second. My heart pounded in my chest. How was he here? How was he always so close? He hadn't just gotten off the same train as me. He had gotten on a completely different one. And yet, there he was. He looked the same as always, calm, unbothered, but his eyes met mine, and I could tell he knew exactly who I was. He wasn't just a commuter anymore. He was something else. I couldn't explain it, but something in the way he looked at me made my blood run cold. I didn't want to stick around to find out. I turned and walked quickly toward the exit. My mind raced. How had he done that? Why was he following me? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how carefully he'd been watching me. Every day, the same routine, the same pattern, until I'd finally broken it. But now, it seemed he was just waiting for me to change things up, waiting for me to slip up. I didn't look back as I exited the station, but the whole time I could feel his gaze on the back of my neck. I didn't go to work that day. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I kept going, I might be making the biggest mistake of my life. The next few days, I stayed home. I didn't take the train. I didn't go out. I couldn't bring myself to face the idea that he might be waiting for me again, like he always did. I couldn't explain what had happened or why he seemed to know exactly where I was going, what I was doing. All I knew was that the man I had seen on the train wasn't just some stranger. He was something more. Eventually, I tried to go back to my regular life, but it wasn't the same. The train, the route, everything, it all felt different. Every time I got on the train, I felt like I was being watched. Every corner I turned, every glance I made, I half expected to see him standing there, waiting. But every day, nothing happened. He didn't show up. I don't know what would have happened if I had kept taking that same train, or if he'd have shown up again. All I know is that I haven't seen him since that day. But I still wonder if he's out there somewhere, waiting for me to slip up again. It was meant to be a relaxing weekend. Just a break from the noise of daily life. A few of us had been planning it for a while, booking a cabin out in the woods, far enough from the city that we could just disconnect for a couple of days. No cell service, no distractions. Just the sounds of nature, a few games, and a lot of food. We rented the place online. The photos showed a nice little cabin surrounded by trees. It was rustic, but that's what we were looking for. The cabin was small but cozy, with an open living space and a big stone fireplace. The bedrooms were decent, with comfortable enough beds. It felt isolated, but that was part of the charm. The first night was perfect. We cooked dinner together, cracked open some drinks, and spent the evening laughing and playing board games. Everything was fine. But as the weekend wore on, a couple of odd things started happening. I didn't think much of it at first. A door that was left slightly ajar when we were sure we'd closed it. The sound of footsteps outside when there shouldn't have been anyone else around. But it was so easy to brush it off. We were in the middle of the woods. It was bound to be the wind or an animal, right? And the door? Well, it was an old cabin. The wood could shift, the lock could catch funny. It was easy to dismiss. The last night there, something happened that made me realize just how wrong things had been. It was already getting late. Everyone was in the living room, winding down, talking quietly, but I had a nagging feeling. I'd been meaning to check something. The closet in one of the bedrooms. It's hard to say why I thought about it. I guess I just remembered that the closet door had been slightly open when we first arrived. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that I was alone in the cabin, that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Something about it just didn't sit right with me. So, I stood up from the couch, excusing myself, and walked toward the back of the cabin where the bedrooms were. The house was quiet, save for the distant hum of insects outside. The floor creaked under my feet as I approached the room. I reached for the door handle of the bedroom with the closet, and when I opened it, I froze. The closet wasn't empty like it should have been. There, sitting in the corner, was a sleeping bag. At first, I thought it might just be an extra one, but then I saw the trash scattered around it. Fast food wrappers, soda cans, empty snack bags. It wasn't just that someone had been in there, it was like someone had been living in the closet. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 days of staying there. Whoever it was had been eating and leaving their trash behind for longer than that. There were even crumbs on the floor. I could feel my stomach drop, but I didn't move. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. We'd been the only ones there. I thought back to the first night when I had checked the cabin, ensuring everything was locked and secure. There was no way someone had slipped in without us noticing. But here it was, a sleeping bag, trash, food wrappers. Evidence of someone who'd been staying in the cabin with us all along. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the mess. My heart pounded in my chest. My first thought was to turn around, go back to the others, but something stopped me. I felt like I had to keep looking. Maybe there was more, something else that would explain it. So, I stepped into the room and walked closer to the closet, my breath shallow. I could hear my own heartbeat, my steps too loud in the silence of the cabin. When I was right next to the sleeping bag, I stopped again, this time noticing something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A small, wrinkled piece of paper. It was tucked under the edge of the sleeping bag. I bent down to pick it up, careful not to disturb anything else. It was just a scrap, but there were words written on it, in a hurried, jagged script. "I'm sorry, but I can't leave now. I'm too scared." The words hit me like a punch. I stood frozen for a moment, the paper shaking in my hand. The air in the cabin felt suddenly heavier, as if I could feel someone watching me. I quickly stuffed the paper into my pocket, stepped away from the closet, and shut the door. My mind was spinning. Who had written that? Who had been in the cabin with us? I had to go back to the others. I didn't know what to say, but I needed to figure this out. I turned and walked out of the room, trying to keep my breathing steady. The hallway felt longer than it had before, as though the house itself was closing in on me. I went back to the living room, where the others were still talking, mostly unaware of my panic. I didn't know how to explain it to them. How do you tell people that someone's been hiding in the house with you, without you knowing? That thought alone sent another wave of coldness down my spine. I sat down on the couch and tried to act normal, like nothing had changed, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd found. I glanced at my friends, trying to gauge if any of them had noticed something off. But they were all relaxed, talking about what to do tomorrow when we finally leave. Nobody else seemed to have the same sense of dread creeping up their necks. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone anymore. That someone was watching us from the shadows, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the rustling of the trees outside the only noise breaking the silence. In the morning, we packed up quickly. No one else seemed to have the same unease I did, but I was eager to leave, to get out of that cabin. As we drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing at the window, watching us go. But there was nothing. I don't know if anyone ever found out who had been living in that cabin. I didn't want to go back and check. The only thing I know is that I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, and the eerie sense that we weren't the only ones who had been there. It was supposed to be an easy night. The parents of the little boy I was babysitting had gone out for a date night, and they'd left me with a list of instructions. He was already in bed by the time they left, and the house was quiet. They told me to just watch TV, order some food if I wanted, and make sure to keep an eye on the baby monitor in case he woke up. It didn't seem like a big deal. I had babysat plenty of times before, and everything usually went without incident. I settled into the couch with a movie. The sound of the rain hitting the windows added to the cozy atmosphere. The baby monitor was on the coffee table beside me, the little red light flashing as usual. I could hear the soft, rhythmic sound of the baby's breathing coming through it. I didn't expect anything unusual. Maybe an hour into the movie, I heard something. It was faint at first, like a soft murmur from the monitor. I paused the movie, thinking maybe the baby had started moving in his sleep or made some noise. But when I turned the volume up on the monitor, I heard it more clearly. It was a man's voice. Low and calm. Where's the mother? I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I sat there, staring at the monitor, waiting for more. At first, I thought it was some sort of interference. But then, the voice came again. Where's the mother, Sarah? I felt the blood drain from my face. The mother's name, was Sarah. I knew that because the parents had mentioned it when they introduced me to their little boy. It was her name. I wasn't sure what to do. I immediately picked up the monitor, pressing it to my ear as if somehow that would help me understand what was happening. It was as if the man was waiting for something, like he was expecting her to respond. The voice was clear, deliberate. Not like a child's babbling or the random sounds a baby might make. This was a voice, calm and deliberate, asking questions. I don't know how long I sat there, the monitor in my hands, trying to figure out if I had misheard it or if something was wrong with the device. I checked the screen to see if there was any indication that someone had gotten into the baby's room. The screen was just static, like usual, showing nothing unusual. The baby was still asleep, or at least, it looked like he was. I set the monitor back down and glanced around the room. The owls felt too quiet, too still. I kept looking at the clock, but time felt like it was dragging. I tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach, but it wouldn't go away. I kept telling myself that I was overreacting, that it was probably just static or some sort of glitch. But deep down, something told me that wasn't it. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was in the house. I stood up and walked to the door of the baby's room. I slowly turned the handle and peeked inside, my heart racing. Everything seemed normal. The baby was in his crib, wrapped in a soft blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. There was no sign of anyone else. No strange shadows, no movements. I felt a little better seeing that, but the voice from the monitor still echoed in my mind. I went back to the living room and picked up the monitor again. My eyes scanned the room, trying to make sense of everything. It was then that I heard it again. "Where's the mother, Sarah?" It was louder this time. Closer. I slammed the monitor down onto the coffee table. I was now on full alert, my body tense, my senses heightened. I couldn't explain it. It was like the voice had moved into the room with me. I didn't know what to think, but my gut told me something was wrong. I glanced at the front door, wondering if I should call the parents or even the police. But what would I say? That I heard a voice on the baby monitor? I felt ridiculous just thinking about it. Then the voice came again. This time, it wasn't just asking about Sarah. It was demanding. "Where is she?" I looked around the room, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I wanted to call Sarah, ask if everything was all right, but I couldn't. I felt like I was being watched. I felt like the house had changed somehow, like it was no longer just the house I had walked into hours ago. There was something else here now. I picked up my phone, almost as if to call Sarah, but I stopped. The idea of talking to her felt wrong, like I was giving in to whatever was happening. The voice had a hold on me, like it was trying to lure me into making a mistake. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and walked toward the baby's room. The monitor was still on, still making that soft static noise. I couldn't bear to listen to it anymore. I turned it off. The silence that followed was worse than the sounds of the voice. I opened the door to the baby's room, but this time, I didn't peek inside. I just walked in, my feet making a soft tapping sound on the hardwood floors. I needed to see with my own eyes that everything was okay. I looked at the baby, who was still asleep, his little face peaceful. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The baby's blanket had shifted. It was no longer lying flat. The corner of it was pulled down, as if someone had been sitting there. I looked closer, but there was no one there. Just the baby, oblivious. I couldn't figure out how the blanket had moved. I didn't want to think about it too much. I reached over and gently fixed it, trying not to disturb the baby. I backed out of the room slowly, my mind racing. I knew I needed to leave, but I couldn't just leave the baby alone. I couldn't. I decided to call the parents. But when I went to reach for my phone, I saw a message pop up. It was from the dad. It read, "Everything okay? We're about 15 minutes away. See you soon." I replied as calmly as I could. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just checking on the baby." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. That voice, That question, or was Sarah, kept replaying in my mind. By the time they came back, I was ready to leave. I didn't want to be in that house for another second. I tried to act normal when they arrived, handing them the baby monitor and telling them everything was fine. But the look on their faces when they asked if anything unusual had happened made me pause. No, nothing unusual, I lied. But when they went to check the baby, I noticed that Dad gave me a strange look. "Who turned the monitor off?" he asked. I froze. I didn't, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked back into the baby's room, muttering something under his breath. I didn't stay to find out what he was looking for. I grabbed my things and left. I never babysat for them again. I had just started my second year of college when things started to feel like they were falling apart. My part-time job barely covered my rent, and I was living off instant noodles most nights. I was tired of the tiny, overpriced apartment I was in and figured it was time to look for something cheaper. But finding anything in my price range was nearly impossible. That's when I saw the ad. It was posted on a roommate finding website. Room for rent in a quiet house. Free rent in exchange for help around the house. Message for details. I figured it was worth a shot. I was desperate. I messaged the guy, and within a couple of hours, he replied. His name was Carl. He said he had a spare room in his house and needed help with general upkeep, nothing too crazy, just helping with groceries, cleaning, maybe a little cooking. He sounded nice enough, and the best part was that he was offering free rent. I couldn't believe my luck. I didn't waste any time. I asked if I could come see the place. He said yes, and we arranged to meet the next day. The house was an older one, but it was clean and had a cozy feel to it. Carl was in his late 30s, I'd guess, maybe early 40s. He looked like an average guy, nothing off about him at all. He was friendly, welcoming, and seemed eager to show me around. He explained that he was a freelance writer and worked from home, which meant he was often around during the day. That suited me just fine, given I was mostly in class during the day and would be at work during the evenings. We talked for a while, and everything seemed perfect. He even showed me the room I would be staying in, which was a decent size and had a big window that let in a lot of natural light. I could already picture myself living there. The idea of not having to worry about rent was such a relief. Carl assured me that the arrangement would be temporary, but we could figure something out in the long term if I wanted to stay. It all felt too good to be true, but I was too tired to second guess it. A few days later, I moved in. Things went well at first. Carl was quiet but polite. He mostly kept to himself, and I didn't mind that at all. I had my own space, and I was getting used to the house. The only odd thing I noticed was that Carl never seemed to sleep. I thought maybe it was just a coincidence at first, but it started to get strange. Every time I came downstairs in the morning, I'd see him sitting at his desk, working away on his computer. Sometimes he'd be reading, sometimes writing, sometimes just staring at the screen. But no matter the time of day, I never saw him sleep. Not once. At night, he'd be in the living room watching TV or on his computer, and when I went to bed, he'd still be up. I figured maybe he was just a night owl or had some weird sleep schedule, but after a few weeks, it started to unsettle me. I was a college student, so I was used to late nights and busy schedules. But I had never encountered someone who just never seemed to sleep. I tried to brush it off as nothing, but something about it started to bug me. Then, one night, I noticed something else strange. I had been out with some friends and came home late, around 1 a.m. I had to get up early the next day for class, so I was ready to go to bed. As I reached the top of the stairs, I realized Carl's light was still on in the living room. I walked past the room and saw him sitting there, staring at the TV. He didn't acknowledge me as I passed, which was normal. He wasn't really the talkative type. But what was strange was that as I walked past, I noticed the door to my room was locked. I stopped in my tracks. I hadn't locked the door myself. I never locked it. I wasn't paranoid, but it struck me as odd. I checked the handle to make sure I wasn't mistaken, and sure enough, the lock was engaged. I tried to shake it off as nothing. Maybe I had locked it without thinking, but something about it didn't sit right. The next morning, I had to leave early for class. When I came back, I found that the door was locked again. I hadn't locked it when I left, and I certainly didn't have a reason to do so. It was the only door in the house that was locked. Carl's door was always open. I thought maybe Carl had done it as a weird precaution, but when I asked him, he just shrugged it off and said he had nothing to do with it. The days went by, and the locking continued. Every time I came home, my door would be locked. And it wasn't like he just locked it once or twice. It was every time, like clockwork. And it wasn't just a lock on my door. There were times when I'd come into the house and the windows in my room would be closed tight, even though I'd left them open. I decided to confront Carl. I don't know why it took me so long. Maybe I was too scared to know the truth, or maybe I was just so relieved by the free rent that I ignored it. But one evening, after a long day of classes, I finally couldn't take it anymore. I knocked on his door. "Carl?" I said, my voice shaking a little. "Can we talk?" He opened the door immediately. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a faint smell of coffee on his breath. "Yeah, what's up?" he asked, his voice a little too casual for the situation. "Why are you locking my door?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but I could feel my hands shaking. He froze for a second, then glanced away. "What do you mean?" "I haven't been locking your door." I shook my head. "Yes, you have. I've noticed it every single time. And it's not just the door. It's the windows too. You've been in my room, haven't you?" He didn't answer right away. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to say anything. But then he sighed, his face falling into an expression that I couldn't quite read. "I didn't want to tell you this," he began slowly. "But I've been having some problems. Some paranoia, I guess you could say. I don't know. But I'm just trying to protect myself." "From what?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me for a long time, like he was weighing whether or not to tell me. Then he spoke again. "I've been hearing things, seeing things. I don't know. I feel like I need to keep you in here. Keep you close." I felt my heart stop for a moment, the words sinking in. I had thought it was a little strange, but I hadn't expected something like this. "I think I need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not comfortable here anymore." Carl didn't argue. He just nodded, standing there in silence. I packed up my things that night. It was a rush. I barely even looked at my stuff, just shoving it all into bags, scared that if I didn't leave soon, something worse might happen. I never went back to that house. I never spoke to Carl again. I've been a landlord for a few years now, managing a few rental properties in a fairly quiet part of town. It's a decent gig, steady work, but nothing too crazy. I've had the usual ups and downs with tenants, but nothing that ever made me feel too uneasy. That was until I started getting complaints about one of my tenants, Daniel. Daniel was in his late 20s when he moved in, quiet, kept to himself, and always paid his rent on time. At first, I didn't have any issues with him. He had a small one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of the building. Nothing remarkable. But after a few months, some of my other tenants started mentioning strange things. One woman, Jessica, who lived on the floor above him, said that her heating would turn on in the middle of the night, even though she hadn't touched the thermostat. Another tenant, Mike, complained that things in his apartment had been moved around. His kitchen drawer would be open, things would be out of place. I thought maybe people were just being paranoid, but the complaints kept coming. And they all seemed to be linked to Daniel's apartment in some way. I'll admit, I wasn't sure what to think at first. Maybe I was just being paranoid myself. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I started to wonder if Daniel had something to do with it. He was always home, never really had friends over, and I hadn't seen him leave the building much. I had no proof, but something felt off. One evening, after another complaint from Jessica about strange noises coming from the walls, I decided to do something I'd never done before, set up a hidden camera in the hallway. The building wasn't huge, just 4 apartments, and I figured it was worth checking out, just to see if anything unusual was happening. I knew Daniel was likely the culprit, but I wanted to catch him in the act. I found a small, discreet camera I had lying around, one I had used in the past for security purposes, and placed it on a shelf behind a potted plant in the hallway. The camera was pointed toward the entrance to Daniel's apartment, with a good view of the hallway and the door. I didn't want to overdo it, just enough to see if Daniel was sneaking into other units or doing something he wasn't supposed to. For the next few days, I checked the footage, but it was pretty uneventful. Daniel would come and go at usual times, and nothing strange seemed to happen. I was beginning to think I was just being paranoid when something showed up on the footage. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. Daniel was coming home late one night, after dark. I could see the hallway light flicker on as he walked toward his door. But then, as he was unlocking the door, something strange happened. He paused for a moment, his head turning toward the hallway. Almost like he was listening. I couldn't hear anything on the footage, but I saw him glance around, then look down at the floor as if checking for something. His movements were slow and deliberate. Then, he entered his apartment, and the camera recorded nothing else for the rest of the night. I thought it was odd, but it wasn't enough to go on, so I brushed it off and didn't think much more of it. The next day, I checked the footage again, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The camera caught Daniel leaving his apartment around 10 a.m. He was dressed normally, but what caught my attention was the way he moved. He wasn't walking directly toward the stairs to leave, as he usually did. Instead, he walked down the hallway, then stopped in front of another tenant's door, Mike's door. For a few moments, he just stood there, staring at it, as if he was waiting for something. Then, he quickly moved on and disappeared from view. I didn't know what to make of it. I figured it was some sort of strange coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to check Mike's apartment later, just to see if anything had been disturbed. When I opened the door to Mike's place, it was obvious right away that something was off. His living room had been ransacked, his couch cushions were tossed around, and his coffee table was pushed to the side. There was a drawer in the kitchen that had been pulled out, its contents spilled across the floor. I immediately texted Mike to ask if he had been inside, but he assured me he hadn't. He hadn't even been home for a few days. At this point, I started to feel a bit sick. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Daniel might be behind all of this. Maybe he'd been sneaking into the other apartments when people weren't around. It was the only thing that made sense. I needed more evidence before confronting him, so I decided to dig deeper. I installed the camera again, this time a bit closer to Daniel's door. I wanted to catch him in the act, to get something more concrete. The next few days felt like a blur. I was constantly checking the footage, hoping to catch something that would make all of this make sense. And then, one night, I finally got what I was looking for. Daniel left his apartment again, just like before, and I watched as he walked down the hallway. This time, however, he didn't stop at Mike's door. He kept walking. I saw him pause in front of another door, the vacant unit at the end of the hall. He stood there for a few moments, his hand resting on the doorknob. My heart started racing. There was no reason for him to be there. The unit had been vacant for months, and I hadn't shown it to anyone in weeks. No one was supposed to be inside. Then, with a quick glance over his shoulder, Daniel opened the door and slipped inside. I immediately froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had to know what was going on in there, so I grabbed my keys and rushed to the vacant apartment, praying I wasn't too late. When I reached the door, I could hear movement inside. The sound of things shuffling, and then a faint creak, like someone was adjusting something. I didn't knock or announce myself. I just pushed the door open, hoping that I wasn't too far behind. What I saw inside stopped me in my tracks. Daniel was standing in the middle of the room, looking around. But it wasn't the apartment that shocked me, it was what he was doing. He was kneeling down by one of the walls, pulling a loose panel away. I could see now that the walls weren't as solid as they seemed. There were small holes drilled into them, hidden by furniture and decor. And behind them, I realized, was a series of vents just big enough for someone to peek through. Daniel was watching other tenants. He'd been watching them through the walls. It was obvious now. My blood ran cold as I understood what he had been doing. He'd been sneaking into the other apartments through hidden passages, spying on them, moving their things, probably hoping they wouldn't notice. And when they did, he was careful to cover his tracks. I stood there for a long time, just staring at him. He didn't notice me at first, but when he finally turned around and saw me, his face went pale. He scrambled to stand up, his eyes wide with fear. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He knew I had him. I walked out of the apartment and immediately called the police. They arrived soon after. Daniel was arrested, and after they searched his apartment, they found more evidence of what he had been doing. He had been watching tenants for months, and no one had known. He even made crude recordings of some of them, some of which were found hidden behind more walls and floorboards. I couldn't believe it. It was like something out of a nightmare. It was only then that I realized how many red flags I had ignored: the odd behavior, the strange movements, the way he never slept. It was all there, right in front of me. I had to evict the other tenants who had been living in the building at the time, and I had to do a full security overhaul of the place. It took a long time to get things back to normal, but I never felt the same after that. I still check every apartment regularly, still make sure everything is locked and secure. But I'll never forget what I saw that night, the moment I realized that the person I'd been trusting had been spying on everyone. It started with the knocking. At first, I thought it was just the building settling. You know how old apartments are: creaks, groans, and the occasional noise that doesn't make any sense. But after a few nights, it became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just any noise. It was a soft, rhythmic knock, like someone tapping on a wall or a pipe. I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. The sound seemed to come from the vents, which didn't make sense at all. I tried to brush it off, but it started to get louder. I live in an old building, so maybe it was just some odd plumbing issue or the vent system itself acting up. But after a few days, it was unmistakable knocking in the vents at night, always around the same time. At first, I thought it might just be an animal. Maybe a mouse or a squirrel had found its way into the ducts. But it didn't sound like that. It wasn't a scrambling noise, it was steady. It had a rhythm. And sometimes, it was too quiet to hear unless everything else in the apartment was completely silent. The knocking was soft at first, like tapping your fingers lightly on a wooden table. But as the days went by, it started to get louder. I couldn't take it anymore. Every night, I'd try to sleep, but the tapping would start again, always when I was about to drift off. It got to the point where I would lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic knocking echoing through the vents. I wasn't the only one hearing it. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Sarah, who lived in the apartment next to mine. She was an older lady, always friendly, and she seemed to listen intently when I described the sound. She said she hadn't heard anything herself, but she agreed that it sounded strange. At first, I felt a bit crazy. But then, one night, she came over to my apartment to check out the noise for herself. We both sat in the living room, listening intently, and after a few minutes, there it was, the soft knocking. Sarah's eyes widened, and she looked at me. "What in the world is that?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. It was too odd, too consistent, and it had been happening for far too long for me to just dismiss it. We both sat there in the silence, waiting for it to stop. But it didn't. That was when I decided to call the building maintenance. I didn't know what else to do. The knocking was driving me crazy, and I didn't want to be the crazy tenant who complained about every little thing. But this wasn't normal. There was something wrong. The next day, maintenance came by to check out the situation. I led the guy to the vent in the living room, pointing out where I'd been hearing the knocking. He seemed a little skeptical at first, but he took a look anyway. He pressed his ear against the vent and listened for a while. "I don't hear anything," he said. I told him I was sure it was coming from there. So, he got his tools and unscrewed the vent cover. He peered inside, shining a flashlight into the dark ductwork. It was quiet for a moment, and then he called out to me. "Hey," he said. "You might want to come take a look at this." I walked over, feeling a knot in my stomach. I had no idea what I was about to see, but I felt this creeping sense that something wasn't right. Inside the vent, there was a small gap just big enough for a person to crawl through. The maintenance guy poked his flashlight further in, and that's when I saw it. There were small marks along the walls of the vent, like someone had been dragging themselves through it. And there were bits of dirt and clothing fibers caught on the edges. Not only that, but the space inside the duct was tight, too tight for anything large to fit, except for a person. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just some weird coincidence, but I knew deep down that this wasn't normal. I couldn't shake the thought of someone crawling through the vents. I could hardly breathe. My first thought was that maybe someone had been living in the ducts, hiding away. But how could that even be possible? The maintenance guy started pulling out more items. He retrieved a couple of old food wrappers, and I immediately felt my stomach turn. I tried to remind myself that the building was old. Maybe someone had hidden something there before. But then he pulled out something else. A small, torn piece of fabric. I stared at it for a moment, trying to process it. It looked like a shirt, but not one I recognized. It was stained with something, and the edges were frayed. Then he reached deeper into the duct. His hand brushed against something, and there was a faint scraping noise. It sounded too deliberate. I held my breath as he pulled out a small, crumpled-up sleeping bag. It wasn't anything special, just a cheap one, but seeing it made my heart race. Who would have been hiding in the ducts? And why? I could feel the panic rising in my chest. My hands started to shake, and my vision blurred as I tried to process what was happening. I didn't want to think about what it meant about who might have been in the vents, watching me, living there, while I went about my daily life completely unaware. The maintenance guy looked at me, his face pale. "I don't know who's been in here," he said, his voice shaky. "But this is really bad. I'll call the building manager and let him know what's going on. This is not normal." I could barely speak. I nodded, trying to hold it together, and I backed away from the vent. I didn't want to be in that apartment anymore. I wanted out. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. The maintenance guy left to call the manager, and I was left alone in the apartment, the silence pressing down on me. The knocking had stopped for now, but I felt like I couldn't breathe. Who was living in the vents? And why didn't anyone tell me? Later that day, the building manager came by, and the police were called. I was too shaken to explain everything properly, but they told me they would check the entire building to see if anyone else had been hiding in the ducts or using the space. The whole situation felt surreal. How long had this been going on? How many times had I been unaware of someone so close, hidden right under my nose? After the inspection, the police said they didn't find any signs that anyone else had been living in the vents. They found no evidence of someone actively living there anymore, but they couldn't explain why there were still remnants of food wrappers, fabric, and the sleeping bag. The maintenance guy told me that they would have the ducts sealed up properly, and no one would be able to crawl through them again. But I never felt safe in that apartment again. The knocking stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, watching me. For how long, I'll never know. I moved out a few months later. The thought of someone hiding in the ducts, just out of view, was enough to make me leave. I still don't know who it was or why they were there. But I'll never forget the feeling of finding that sleeping bag, knowing that someone had been in those vents, living there, while I thought I was alone. I found a phone in the bushes one evening while I was walking home from the store. I wasn't expecting it. It was just lying there, half buried in the dirt, like someone had dropped it and then just left it. I bent down to pick it up, thinking maybe it could be a lost item that someone might want back. The screen was cracked, but the phone still turned on when I pressed the power button. It didn't take long for the phone to boot up. The screen was locked, but the wallpaper was a photo of what looked like an old park, maybe somewhere near here. I thought it was strange that the phone didn't have a passcode, so I started flipping through the apps, trying to see if I could figure out who it belonged to. It wasn't until I got to the photos that things got weird. At first, the photos seemed pretty normal. Just a few selfies and pictures of a group of people I didn't recognize. There were some shots of a family on what looked like a vacation, a few pictures of meals or landmarks, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I started noticing something strange. There were pictures of people sleeping. Not selfies, not posed pictures, just people in beds, eyes closed, as if they were taken without the person knowing. It made me uncomfortable, but I figured maybe the phone belonged to someone who had a habit of taking pictures when they weren't supposed to. People do strange things with their phones, right? But the more I scrolled, the weirder it got. The photos weren't just of random people. They were of people in their bedrooms, sleeping. Some photos were blurry, as if they had been taken in the dark, but others were clear. I could see the details of the bed sheets, the pillows, the way people slept. In some photos, you could see the peacefulness of someone in deep sleep, while in others, the shot seemed almost too close, like the person holding the camera was right there in the room with them. I started to feel a creeping sense of unease. I flipped through more pictures, hoping to make sense of it, but there was no explanation. The photos didn't make sense. Why would someone take so many pictures of people sleeping? And then I saw it. The last few photos were different. These weren't just random people. These were pictures of me, taken from outside my window. I could feel my stomach drop. The first one was a wide shot of my living room window. The blinds were closed, but I could still tell it was my place. I immediately checked to make sure everything in my apartment was how I left it. The second picture was a close-up shot of my window, my reflection barely visible in the glass. I couldn't see the person who had taken the photo, but it was clear they were standing just outside, trying to get a shot of me through the glass. I panicked. I checked the window, but the blinds were still down. The room was still dark, but the unease was settling in, thick and suffocating. I scrolled through the rest of the photos, my heart pounding. Each one got closer. In one, I could see myself sitting on my couch, my back turned to the window, oblivious to whoever was outside. The final photo sent a cold shiver down my spine. It was of me sleeping in my bed. The shot was taken from the corner of my room, through the window that was barely cracked open. It was so clear. I could see the way the light from the street lamp outside illuminated the edges of my sheets, the outline of my body beneath them. I couldn't remember ever seeing someone standing there, watching me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was about to throw up, but I didn't know what to do. I kept staring at the photo, my own face staring back at me, unaware that someone had been watching me sleep. I shut off the phone and stood there for a few minutes, trying to collect myself. My heart was racing. I didn't know what to think or who to trust. It was one of those situations where you don't know whether to panic or try to stay calm. But I knew I had to act fast. I went straight to my front door, locking it behind me, and stepped outside to look around. The night was quiet. No one was out there. The street was empty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I took a deep breath, trying to think clearly. The first thing I did was call the police. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say, but I knew I had to report this somehow. When they answered, I explained everything, how I'd found the phone, the photos, and how someone had been taking pictures of me. They asked if I had any idea who could have been doing it, but I didn't. I didn't recognize anyone in the photos, and I couldn't think of anyone who would want to do this to me. The officer who responded seemed skeptical at first, like maybe I was overreacting. But I could hear the change in his voice when I mentioned the photos of me in my apartment. I told him everything I knew about the pictures from outside my window, the way the camera was zoomed in so close. He said they'd send someone to take a look at my place, and that they would start an investigation into the phone. I felt sick the whole time I waited. The police arrived about an hour later, and they took the phone to look for any evidence. I told them about the photos and the way the phone had been unlocked, like whoever owned it hadn't cared to keep anything hidden. They searched the area around my apartment, but no one was found. That's when they told me something that made my blood run cold. The phone wasn't registered to anyone. There was no name attached to it, no information that could identify the owner. It was as if the phone had just appeared out of nowhere. The police told me they would keep it in case they found something useful, but I wasn't sure how much that would help. For days, I kept waiting for the police to find something. They never did. It was like whoever had been watching me just vanished. The phone, the photos, the whole thing, it all felt like a bad dream. I couldn't shake the feeling that the person who took those photos was still out there, watching. I started taking extra precautions. I bought a security camera for my front door, installed extra locks, and kept the blinds closed at all times. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. I still hear strange noises at night, sometimes. I don't know if it's my imagination, but it's always there. That nagging feeling, like someone is just outside, waiting. The police never found out who was behind it. I never found out how that phone ended up in the bushes or why someone was taking pictures of me. But I know one thing for sure, I'll never look out my window the same way again. I work at a department store, mostly evening shifts. It's the kind of place where people go to grab a quick item or two after work, but it's mostly quiet, especially after 8 p.m. I don't mind it, it's a pretty easy job. I stock shelves, help customers, and clean up the store. The other employees usually head out at closing time, and I'm left to do the final rounds before locking up. It was a Friday night when it happened. I had just finished mopping one of the aisles and was about to take my last break before locking up for the night. The store was nearly empty, except for a few stragglers looking for last-minute items. I didn't think anything was out of the ordinary when I went into the back to grab a cup of coffee. It wasn't until I came back out to the main floor that I realized something was wrong. I didn't hear any of the usual closing sounds. You know, like the lights flickering off, the creaky sound of the automatic doors locking, or even the hum of the air conditioning turning off for the night. I looked around and noticed the store was completely silent. The front doors were locked. I didn't think much of it at first. Sometimes they lock early if the manager decides to head out before closing. But then I checked my phone and saw it was well past closing time. I figured the manager just forgot to tell me. I pulled out my key, walked up to the front doors, and tried to unlock them. Nothing. The lock wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, but it was like something was stuck. That's when it hit me. I was locked in. I immediately went to the back office and tried to call the manager, but the call wouldn't go through. I checked my phone again. No service. Not even a bar. Panic started to settle in, but I tried to stay calm. I figured maybe the manager had left for the night and didn't lock the doors properly. I decided to go around the back, where we usually had the emergency exit, and try from there. But when I walked toward the back storage room, I realized something was off. The lights, usually dimmed by that time, were still on. The store was empty, but there was an uncomfortable feeling in the air, like someone was watching me. I could feel it at the back of my neck. I shook it off, though. Maybe it was just the stress of being locked in. I made my way to the storage room and checked the emergency exit. The door was locked from the inside, and the push bar didn't work. It wouldn't budge. I tried calling the manager again, but still no service. That's when I started hearing the noises. At first, it was faint, like footsteps echoing from the other end of the store. I stood still, trying to figure out if someone was in there with me. Maybe another employee had stayed late. Maybe they were messing around. But I hadn't heard any of them leave. The store had been empty when I checked. I walked through the aisles toward the source of the noise, keeping my footsteps quiet. As I turned the corner of the home goods section, I saw movement from the far side of the store. My heart skipped a beat. There was someone standing in the shadows, just barely visible, as though they were waiting for me to notice them. I froze, staring at them, my mind racing. I couldn't tell if it was a customer or someone who had gotten locked in too. I called out, "Hello," but they didn't respond. I took a step forward, then another, and the figure disappeared into the aisle. I started walking faster now, hoping to catch up and talk to whoever it was. But as I reached the spot where I saw them last, there was no one there. No one in sight. My breathing got heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I moved toward the electronics section, which was always near the back of the store, when I heard a sound behind me. A loud crash, like something heavy had been knocked over. I turned around, my heart pounding. Nothing. No one was there. I wasn't sure what to do. My first instinct was to find the nearest phone, but my phone was still out of service. There was no way I could reach anyone. And then I remembered the store's landline phone in the office. Maybe I could call for help from there. It felt like the only option. I made my way back through the store, moving as quietly as I could. My footsteps echoed through the long aisles, and the silence was suffocating. When I finally got to the back office, I grabbed the phone and dialed the manager's number. The call went through this time, but when I heard the voicemail, a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't get through to anyone. I hung up the phone and turned to leave the office, but as I did, I heard something behind me. Soft footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I spun around and saw the shadow of someone standing at the end of the hallway. A figure in the dark, just barely visible. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky. Nothing. I moved closer, my footsteps barely making a sound, and that's when I saw them. The person wasn't standing still anymore. They were moving, creeping closer to me, like they were watching me, waiting for me to make the first move. The figure didn't speak. Didn't do anything except move toward me. The air felt cold now, and my mind screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "Who are you?" I asked, feeling stupid, like saying something might break the silence and reveal what was happening. "Why are you in here?" Still nothing. Just the sound of footsteps, closer now. I couldn't see their face, but I could tell they were staring right at me. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off them. I couldn't stay in the office. I couldn't stay anywhere in the store. The exits were all locked, and I had no way of getting out. I decided to try the staff elevator. I figured if the doors wouldn't open, I could at least hide in it, try to wait until morning. I rushed through the store, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the elevator, I pressed the button, praying it would open. It did, and I stepped inside, quickly hitting the button for the top floor. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things, but I could swear I heard footsteps behind me again. The elevator doors closed, and the car began to rise. I watched the numbers light up as it went up floor by floor. When it reached the top, the doors opened, and for a second, everything was still. I don't know how long I stood there, listening, but eventually, I heard the faint sound of footsteps again. This time, much closer. I bolted down the hallway to the service exit. The door opened without resistance. I burst out into the night air, my heart still racing. I didn't stop running until I reached the front of the store, where I finally saw the lights of a passing car. I don't know how the person got in, or what they were doing in the store. I don't even know if they ever left. But that night, I realized how terrifying it is to be completely alone and trapped, with no way to get help. I never worked a late shift again after that night. I'm not sure where to even begin with this. I still don't know if what happened that night was real or if I just imagined the whole thing. I've told a few people about it, but no one really seems to believe me. I've tried to forget it, but the memory keeps creeping back. Maybe sharing it here will help me make sense of it. It all started a couple of months ago. I had recently moved to the area for work, and I didn't really know many people. I kept to myself mostly, but there was this one girl from the office, Sarah, who had been friendly to me since I arrived. We would chat occasionally during lunch breaks, and she seemed nice enough. One afternoon, she invited me to a party that her friend was throwing that weekend. At first, I hesitated. I'm not really a party person, and I didn't know Sarah that well. But she was insistent. She said it would be fun, and that I'd meet a lot of great people. So, I figured why not. I didn't have any plans, and it might be a good way to get to know a few more people. The day of the party, I got a text from Sarah around 5 p.m. She gave me the address and told me to come around 8 o'clock. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now I wish I had paid more attention to the details. The address she sent me was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. It was on the outskirts, near a bunch of warehouses and industrial buildings. I remember thinking it was a bit strange. I mean, who throws a party in a warehouse? But I assumed it was just one of those things where people wanted to be away from the usual spots. When I got to the location, I felt an immediate sense of unease. The building looked like it hadn't been used in years. The lights were off, and there was no sign of life. I sat in my car for a moment, debating whether I should just leave. But I had already driven out there, and I didn't want to seem rude. So, I grabbed my purse and got out. The front door to the warehouse was unlocked, which I thought was a bit odd. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The place was dark, and the only light came from a few string lights hanging from the ceiling. There was a strange smell in the air, kind of like dust and something else I couldn't place. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" No answer. I walked a few steps further into the warehouse, glancing around. The place was huge, with high ceilings and empty space all around. There was no furniture, no decorations, just empty floor space and more of those string lights hanging down in the corners. I wasn't sure if I was in the right place. Maybe they were still setting up. I pulled out my phone and checked the address again. It was definitely the right location. I texted Sarah, asking where everyone was. The minutes ticked by with no response. The quiet was unnerving, but I didn't want to seem too paranoid, so I decided to give her a call. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message, telling her I was there and asking if she was around. I stood in the middle of the empty warehouse, feeling more and more out of place. My phone buzzed a few minutes later, and I thought it might be Sarah texting back. But when I looked at the screen, it was just a message from my coworker. Nothing urgent. I looked around again, trying to figure out what to do. The whole building seemed deserted. I was starting to feel like I'd been set up, or maybe Sarah had given me the wrong address. I decided to leave and get back in my car. But as I turned to walk toward the door, I heard something. A sound, a soft thud. Like something moving, just beyond the reach of the light. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. I called out again, "Hello?" No answer. I felt a cold chill run through me, but I shook it off, convincing myself it was just the building settling. But then, the noise came again. A faint sound, like footsteps this time, moving from the far end of the warehouse. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty space in front of me, wondering if I should just leave. But the curiosity got the better of me. I slowly walked toward the noise, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and my hands started to sweat. My head was spinning with thoughts of what could be going on. As I neared the far side of the warehouse, I saw a shadow moving along the wall. A person. The figure was too far away to make out any details, but I knew it wasn't Sarah. I felt my stomach drop. "Hello?" I called out again, trying to sound confident, but my voice was shaking. "Is anyone there?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly started to walk toward me. I froze, watching as it got closer. I was too scared to move. I had no idea who this person was or what they wanted. All I knew was that I had walked into something I shouldn't have. Just as the figure stepped into the dim light, I saw his face. It was a man, maybe in his mid-30s. He wasn't wearing anything that stood out, just a plain t-shirt and jeans. But his eyes were wide and vacant. Like he wasn't fully aware of where he was. Or like he was waiting for something. I took a step back, my mind racing. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer. He just kept staring at me, walking closer. It was like he hadn't even heard me. I felt panic rise up in my chest. I turned and bolted toward the exit. I didn't care if I looked crazy, I just needed to get out. As I sprinted across the warehouse, I heard him following me. The footsteps were getting louder, closer. I reached the door, yanked it open, and slammed it shut behind me. My heart was racing in my chest, and I could barely catch my breath. I didn't even bother looking back. I just ran to my car and drove off, not stopping until I reached my apartment. I never went back to that warehouse. I tried texting Sarah again, calling her, but she never responded. I haven't heard from her since that night. I don't know if I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or if something more sinister was happening there. I just know that whatever it wasn't a party. I still can't shake the feeling that someone was watching me that night. I still wonder if the man was just a stranger or if he was waiting for someone else to show up. What I do know is that I don't trust Sarah anymore, and I will never forget the look in that man's eyes. If anyone knows anything about that warehouse, I'd appreciate any info. I don't know if what happened to me that night was just a coincidence, but I'm still afraid of what I might have walked into. I'm still not sure what happened that night. I've tried to convince myself it was just a weird, one-off incident, but the more I think about it, the more I realize how wrong everything felt. I work as a barista at a small coffee shop downtown. It's a pretty quiet place, especially at night when the rush has passed and things start winding down. I don't mind the late shifts. It gives me time to catch up on reading or just zone out, listen to music, and clean up. There's always a sense of calm when you're the only one in the shop. That night, though, was different. I was covering a late shift for a coworker. Her name was Laura, and she'd asked me to take over for her since she had a family emergency. Normally, I'd be getting off at 9 o'clock, but I was scheduled to stay until closing that night, which was around midnight. I didn't mind, like I said. It was a quiet shift, and I was pretty used to it by then. The night started normal. A few customers came in for their usual late-night drinks. Nothing too special. I remember a man in his late 40s came in and ordered a black coffee. I don't remember much about him except that he was a regular. He sat down in the corner, barely said anything. Just a quick nod and he took his drink to a table near the window. I always made a point not to engage too much with customers, especially during late shifts. It's just one of those unwritten rules of the job. It wasn't until I finished cleaning the counters, turned off the espresso machines, and started doing the closing chores that I began to feel uneasy. It wasn't anything obvious. It wasn't like a creepy vibe, but more like an instinct. The shop was empty. The lights were dim, and the hum of the refrigerators was the only sound filling the silence. But, for some reason, I felt like I wasn't alone. I kept shaking it off, telling myself it was just the quiet of the place. The only people I had served that evening were regulars. I had no reason to think anyone would be lurking around. By 11:50, I'd finished mopping the floor and was wiping down the last of the counters. The place was spotless, and I was ready to lock up. I grabbed my phone to check the time. My shift was nearly over. I started to lock the front door when I heard something. It was faint at first, almost like a tapping, coming from the back door. I froze. The back door wasn't in use for customers. It led to the alleyway behind the shop, and we usually only opened it for deliveries or when we took out the trash. There was no reason for anyone to be back there, especially this late. I tried to ignore it, but then the sound came again, louder this time. A pound. A knock, not like a tap, but a firm, deliberate knock, followed by a voice. "Hey! I know you're in there." It was a man's voice, and he sounded angry. My first instinct was to just ignore it and keep locking up. Maybe it was someone who had been drinking, and I didn't want to deal with it. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. "I know it's you, Sarah. Open the door." My heart stopped. I didn't know who this guy was, but I knew for certain that I hadn't told a single person my name that day. My name's Emma, and I had only been working at that shop for about a month. I'd never introduced myself to any customers as Sarah. I froze for a moment. I thought maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe he was looking for someone else. But then, he knocked again. Harder this time. And louder. "Sarah, open the door. I know you're in there." Panic started to rise in my chest. I didn't want to confront him. I didn't want to open the door and risk something bad happening. What if it wasn't just some random guy who had mistaken me for someone else? What if he was dangerous? I took a few steps away from the back door, my eyes darting around the room for something, anything, that I could use to defend myself if I needed to. My mind raced. Was I supposed to call the police? Should I go to the front door and try to get help from the street? I quickly turned off the lights near the back of the shop so I wouldn't be visible from the alley, hoping he wouldn't see me through the windows. The pounding didn't stop, though. It just got more frantic, more insistent. "Sarah, I know you're there. I'm not leaving until you open up." I didn't want to do it, but I grabbed my phone. I dialed 911. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a couple of tries to hit the right number. When the operator answered, I didn't even know what to say at first. I think someone's outside. They're knocking on the door. I don't know what to do." The operator calmed me down, told me to stay inside and keep the doors locked. She said help was on the way, but I wasn't sure how long it would take. I told her I didn't know why this person was targeting me, but I felt like I was in danger. She repeated the instructions: stay inside, don't open the door. I stayed near the counter, my phone in my hand, trying to keep as quiet as possible. The man's pounding on the door continued, but after a while, it seemed to slow down. I didn't know what he was doing, but I couldn't bring myself to look. I could barely breathe. My body felt frozen, like I was trapped in a nightmare. Then, everything went silent. The knocking stopped. For a few seconds, I almost thought I imagined the whole thing. Maybe he had gone away, or maybe I just scared him off with a phone call. But then, I heard a scraping sound from the back door. I turned toward the noise, heart racing. The handle was moving. Someone was trying to open it. I felt a surge of terror. I stepped back from the door and looked around, but there was no way out. I couldn't hide. The only thing I could do was wait and hope the police would get there in time. Just as I was about to call the operator again, I heard sirens. The man outside stopped moving. The door stopped rattling. I don't know if he heard the sirens or if he was just scared, but he was gone by the time the police arrived. The officers checked the back of the shop and found no one. They went through the alley and found nothing unusual. They did a sweep of the area but couldn't find anyone matching the description. The whole thing was terrifying. No one ever figured out who that man was, or how he knew my name. The police told me it was probably just a prank or some mistake, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I never worked another late shift at that coffee shop. I couldn't. I don't know why that man targeted me, but I knew I couldn't put myself in that position again. And I never went by the name Sarah again. I don't even know if I'll ever feel safe in that shop again. The worst part is, I still don't know who that person was, or why they thought I was someone named Sarah. This happened about a year ago, and I still can't quite wrap my mind around it. I've kept quiet about it, mostly, but after everything that happened, I feel like I need to share it somewhere. The whole thing still makes me feel uneasy when I think back on it. Last summer, I decided to take a long road trip across the country. I had just graduated and had some time off before starting my new job, so I figured I'd spend a few weeks just driving around, seeing new places. I didn't plan anything too detailed, just loosely mapped out a few cities I wanted to hit and let the road take me where it would. No rush, no deadlines. It was one of those trips where the freedom of it all made me feel like I could disappear into the scenery, and I did. I'm someone who likes to keep things simple, so I had a small disposable camera with me. I didn't want to rely too much on my phone for photos. I wanted something old school, something tangible. The kind of camera that didn't have a lot of settings, where you just took the picture and hoped for the best. I filled the roll over the course of 2 weeks, snapping photos of random sites, old diners, and quiet little towns. When I got back home, I went to the photo lab to get the film developed. The guy behind the counter was your typical film store worker, a little disinterested, but polite enough. I handed him the camera and waited for him to process it. As he handed the envelope back to me, he made a strange comment. "You got some interesting shots in here," he said, sounding almost confused. "Yeah," I replied, unsure of what he meant. "Nothing wrong with them, just odd. You might want to take a look." I figured he was just commenting on the weird angles or maybe the lighting. I didn't think much of it at first. But as soon as I got home and started flipping through the pictures, I realized what he was talking about. In nearly every picture from the trip, there was someone in the background. At first, I thought maybe I'd just caught someone in the frame without meaning to, maybe someone walking by, or just a random person who happened to be near when I clicked the shutter. But then I started noticing something strange. The same man was in multiple photos. The man was always in the background, in different cities, standing in the distance, staring directly at the camera. It wasn't like a brief moment or someone who had walked past. It was as if he'd been intentionally positioned there, in the exact spot I was taking the picture from, staring at me. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was a coincidence, a series of odd shots. But as I looked at the photos more closely, I could see how he looked the same man every time. Tall, wearing a dark jacket and a hat. His face was hard to make out in most of the pictures because of the distance, but you could tell he was looking straight at me. And he was in nearly every city I had visited. It started to get under my skin. I started retracing my steps, mentally going through each of the places I had visited. I'd taken a picture at a gas station in Arizona, and there he was, just standing behind a car in the background, watching me. In another, taken outside a small diner in New Mexico, he was standing next to a telephone pole, staring through the window at me. The more I looked, the more I realized he had appeared in nearly every shot I took. One picture stood out more than the others. I'd stopped in a small park in Texas to stretch my legs. I took a shot of the fountain, the green grass around it, and the old stone pathway. It seemed like a peaceful moment. But when I looked at the developed image, I saw him standing near the bushes behind the fountain. He was so far back in the shot that it took me a while to even notice. He was still watching. His posture was rigid, like he was standing still for hours. I could feel my heart rate pick up as I examined the photos. I hadn't seen him while I was taking the pictures. I didn't even remember noticing him at all when I was at those places. He was always so far off in the background that I didn't think much of it. But now that I was seeing it, it made no sense. I was alone for most of the trip. Who was this man? I started to panic. I called a friend, thinking maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe I was just overreacting, seeing patterns where there weren't any. But when I showed him the photos, he said something that chilled me. Dude, that guy's following you. He's been following you the whole time. I hadn't wanted to admit it, but now that he said it, I couldn't ignore it anymore. My friend asked if I'd felt like I was being watched during the trip, and honestly, I hadn't. I never noticed anything strange. But how could I have missed it? How could I have missed this guy? I went back through the photos again, obsessing over every detail. I studied the background of each picture, looking for any sign that I might have missed. In one of the shots, taken in a small town in Wyoming, I saw him again, much closer this time, standing by a fence, his face now partially visible. He wasn't just watching from far away, he was right there, not far from where I had parked. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. He was getting closer. I still had the negatives from the film, so I decided to go back to the photo lab and ask the worker if he had noticed anything strange about the photos when he developed them. When I showed him the pictures, he looked just as confused as I had been. "I don't know," he said, "it's just regular film. I didn't notice anything strange about it. But I can't help you out too much. Maybe just try to forget about it." I was already feeling paranoid by then, and his response did nothing to calm me down. I started wondering if the guy at the store knew more than he let on. But I couldn't ask him directly. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I was starting to lose sleep over the whole thing. I stopped looking at the photos after a while, but the images kept coming back to me in my mind. The man, always just out of view, always lurking in the background. It made me feel like I couldn't escape him, like he was always there, watching, no matter where I went. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. He had to have been following me from the very beginning. But why? I still don't know who that man is, or what his intentions were. I haven't seen him again, and I don't want to. I try not to think about it too much, but every now and then, I'll get a creeping feeling, like I'm being watched. The worst part is, I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again. I don't know how long he'd been following me, or if I'll ever run into him again. But I can't forget about those photos. The images of that man, standing in the background, always watching. I was walking home from my friend's house late in the evening. It wasn't dark yet, but the sun was low, and I knew I needed to get back before it got too late. I usually take the main roads, but that day, I decided to cut through the alley behind the hardware store. It saved about 10 minutes, and I'd walked through there plenty of times before without any problems. The alley wasn't long. You could see straight through to the other side where it opened back onto the street. There were a few dumpsters and some old wooden pallets leaning against the walls, but it was mostly empty. I didn't feel nervous at first. I was just focused on getting home. I was about halfway down when I heard footsteps behind me. They were close enough that I knew they weren't just someone passing through. I glanced back and saw two men walking toward me. They weren't running, but their pace was quick, like they were trying to catch up. One of them was wearing a dirty gray hoodie, and the other had on a leather jacket that looked way too heavy for the weather. They didn't look like anyone I'd seen around before. "Hey, wait up," the guy in the hoodie called out. I stopped but kept a little distance between us. I thought maybe they were going to ask for directions or something. When they got closer, the guy in the hoodie smiled, but it didn't feel friendly. "Don't you remember us?" he said. "We've met before." I shook my head. "I don't think so." "Sure we have," the guy in the leather jacket said. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking a lot. "You were with your dad at that car shop last month, right? You had the blue jacket on." I hadn't been to any car shop recently, and I didn't even own a blue jacket. I told them they must have me confused with someone else, but they didn't back off. "Nah, it was definitely you," the guy in the hoodie insisted. He stepped closer, cutting off the path ahead of me. "You're just playing dumb." I started to feel uneasy. My heart was beating faster, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about. I need to get home." The guy in the leather jacket moved behind me, blocking the way I'd come. I was stuck between them. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall like he had all the time in the world. "You're not in a hurry, are you?" he asked. "We just want to talk." "Yeah, just talk," the hoodie guy said. "What's the rush?" I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to figure out what to do. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't want to pull it out and make it obvious I was calling for help. I felt trapped, and the alley suddenly seemed a lot longer than it had a minute ago. The guy in the hoodie stepped even closer, invading my space. "You live around here, right? We've seen you before. You're always walking this way." That made my stomach drop. If they really had been watching me, I hadn't noticed. I told them again they had the wrong person, but my voice was shaking now. They knew I was scared. "Relax," the leather jacket guy said. "We're just being friendly. You don't have to act all stuck up." I took a step back, but it didn't help. The hoodie guy matched my movement, keeping the distance the same. His smile was gone now, replaced by something colder. "You think you're too good to talk to us?" he asked, his tone sharper. I tried to step around him, but he moved to block me again. The leather jacket guy pushed off the wall and started closing the gap behind me. I was running out of space, and they both knew it. "Let me go," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice cracked. "Go where?" the hoodie guy said, almost laughing. We're not done yet. My hand was in my pocket now, gripping my phone, but I was too scared to pull it out. I felt like if I made one wrong move, things would get worse. Someone's going to come through here, I said, hoping to bluff them. This is a busy street. No one's coming, the leather jacket guy said. Why do you think we picked this spot? That's when I panicked. I bolted to the side, aiming for the small gap between the hoodie guy and the wall. He grabbed for me, but I twisted away and ran as fast as I could. I didn't look back, but I could hear them shouting and their footsteps pounding behind me. The other end of the alley felt like it was miles away. My chest was burning, and my legs felt like they might give out, but I didn't stop. I burst out onto the street, nearly colliding with a man walking his dog. I shouted for help, barely able to get the words out. The two guys stopped at the edge of the alley. They didn't come any further, probably because the street was busy enough that people would notice. They just stood there, staring at me, before turning and walking back the way they'd come. The man with the dog called the police for me. I was shaking so much I could barely explain what had happened. When the officers arrived, they took my statement and walked me home, but they didn't find the two men. They told me to avoid the alley from now on and to call them if I saw anything suspicious. I haven't taken that shortcut since. I don't think I ever will again. Even now, every time I see someone walking toward me, I feel a spike of fear, wondering if it's them. Wondering if they'll remember me. The ATM was bathed in pale blue light, a lonely beacon on an otherwise quiet street. I had parked my car just a few feet away, keeping the engine running for warmth. It was late, close to midnight, and the crisp night air felt sharper than usual. The kind of cold that cuts through your jacket and settles in your bones. I wasn't planning to stay long. Just a quick withdrawal, enough cash to cover a few things I needed the next day. I glanced over my shoulder as I stepped up to the machine. The street was empty, except for a few parked cars scattered down the block. Nothing moved. No pedestrians, no traffic. A faint hum from the streetlights was the only sound. It was quiet, too quiet, but that's what I liked about this time of night. Fewer people, less hassle. The ATM whirred as I punched in my PIN and selected the withdrawal amount. I reached into my pocket, half distracted, fiddling with my phone to check my messages. The machine spat out the cash, and I grabbed the bills, stuffing them into my wallet. That's when I heard it. A faint rustle, like shoes scraping against pavement. At first, I thought it was just the wind kicking up some debris, but then it came again, closer this time. A deliberate step. I froze, my hand still on my wallet, and turned slowly. A man emerged from the shadows near the corner of the building. He wasn't tall, but he was solidly built, wearing a dark hoodie pulled up over his head. His face was partially obscured, but the glint of his eyes caught the light from the ATM. He wasn't running, wasn't rushing toward me, he was walking, slow and deliberate, like he already knew I wasn't going anywhere. "Hey," he said, his voice low and steady. "Don't make this hard." I felt my stomach drop. My grip on my wallet tightened instinctively, even as my brain screamed at me to stay calm. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sounding thinner than I intended. He stepped closer, and I could see the outline of something in his hand, a knife. Not huge, but sharp enough to get his point across. "The money," he said, nodding toward my wallet. "All of it. Now." My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I raised my hand slightly, trying to show I wasn't going to fight him. "All right, man, just take it easy," I said, fumbling with my wallet. I pulled out the cash I had just withdrawn and held it out to him. He snatched it quickly, but instead of walking away, he stayed put, his eyes narrowing. "That's it? That's all you got?" I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, that's all I took out." He didn't look convinced. His grip on the knife shifted slightly, and he took another step forward. "Nah, I think you've got more. And you're gonna get it for me." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "What?" "The ATM," he said, nodding toward it. "You're gonna take out more. And if this one doesn't let you, we'll go to another." I felt my knees go weak. This wasn't just a quick robbery anymore. He wanted to prolong this, to make me go along with whatever twisted plan he had in mind. "Look, I don't have a lot in my account," I said, trying to reason with him. "I can't." He cut me off with a sharp gesture, the blade catching the light. "Stop talking into what I say. You don't want this to get worse." I hesitated, my mind racing through my options. The ATM was right there, but my gut told me this wouldn't end with just another withdrawal. He was too calm, too methodical, and that terrified me more than anything. This wasn't his first time. "Fine," I said finally, stepping back toward the machine. My hands were shaking as I inserted my card and punched in my PIN again. The screen asked how much I wanted to withdraw, and I selected the maximum. It wasn't much, just a couple hundred, but it was all I could take out. The cash came out in a neat stack, and I handed it to him, hoping it would be enough to make him leave. But he just took it, stuffing it into his pocket without a word. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "Let's go," he said. My heart skipped a beat. "Go where?" He motioned toward my car with the knife. "To another ATM. I know there's more around here. We're gonna hit a few, see how much you can pull out." I felt trapped, cornered. If I got into that car with him, I had no idea what would happen next, but none of the possibilities were good. My thoughts were racing, trying to come up with a way out. "Look, man, you've got the cash," I said, trying to sound calm. "Just take it and go." "I won't say anything, I swear." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Get in the car." I didn't move. My body felt like it was frozen, caught between the urge to run and the fear of what would happen if I did. He took another step closer, and I could feel the sharp edge of the blade in his voice as he spoke again. "Don't make me repeat myself." My mind was screaming at me to think, to act, to do something before it was too late. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw headlights approaching from down the street. A car, moving slowly, its engine humming softly in the distance. It was like a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the car coming closer, and then I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. "Help! Call the police!" My voice echoed off the empty buildings, loud and desperate. The man's expression twisted into anger, and he lunged toward me, but the sudden commotion must have startled him. The approaching car slowed down, its headlights washing over us, and I saw the man hesitate. For a split second, he seemed unsure of what to do. That was all I needed. I turned and ran, sprinting toward the car with everything I had. The driver, a middle-aged woman, looked shocked as I waved my arms frantically, shouting for help. She rolled down her window just as I reached her, and I blurted out, "He's got a knife. Call the police." Behind me, I heard the man curse loudly, but when I turned to look, he was already running the other way, disappearing into the shadows. The woman grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her hand shaking as she tried to explain what had happened. I stayed by her car, my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It felt like hours before the police arrived, though it was probably only a few minutes. I told them everything about the ATM, the knife, the cash, and the man's demand to take me to another machine. They took my statement, searched the area, but he was gone. I still think about that night. About how close I came to getting into that car, and what might have happened if I had. The police never found him, and I doubt they ever will. But every time I pass an ATM now, I feel that same knot in my stomach, the memory of those eyes watching me from the shadows. The train was almost empty, as it always was this late at night. I had taken this route countless times before, and it usually felt safe enough. Most of the people on the train were either glued to their phones or half asleep, just trying to get home like me. That night, though, something was different. I noticed him about 2 stops after I got on. He was sitting a few rows down, angled just enough that I could see his face clearly. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but every time I glanced in his direction, his eyes were locked on me. He wasn't even pretending to look away. It wasn't like he was staring off into space, it was deliberate. Focused. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was zoning out, or maybe he just had one of those faces that looked intense. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling, hoping to distract myself, but I could still feel his eyes on me. It was like a weight pressing on the back of my neck. A few minutes passed, and I risked another glance. He was still staring, his expression unreadable. He didn't look angry or friendly, just focused. It wasn't casual, though. It wasn't normal. I decided to move. There was no reason to sit there feeling uncomfortable when the car behind me was empty. At the next stop, I stood up and walked quickly to the next set of doors. As I stepped into the other car, I glanced back. He was still sitting there, his eyes following me the entire time. The new car was almost completely empty, just a young couple near the back who looked like they were coming back from a night out. I sat down closer to the front, near the door, and tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe he wasn't following me. Maybe it was all in my head. A minute later, I heard the door behind me slide open. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I could feel it, the way the air seemed to shift, the way my skin prickled. He had followed me. He sat down in the same row as me, just on the opposite side of the aisle. Close enough that I could see him in my peripheral vision, but not close enough that it felt like an immediate threat. Still, it was deliberate. It had to be. My heart was pounding now. I stared out the window, pretending to be engrossed in the darkness rushing past, but all I could think about was him. Why was he following me? What did he want? At the next stop, I stood up again. I didn't look at him. I didn't want to give him any excuse to interact with me. I walked calmly to the door, stepped out onto the platform, and crossed to the next car. The train was still stopped, the doors still open. I glanced back, hoping, praying that he would stay where he was. He didn't. I saw him step off the train just as the doors were starting to close. For a second, I thought maybe he was leaving, but then he darted toward the door of the car I had just entered. He made it through just before it shut. I felt trapped. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. There weren't many people around. Just a handful of passengers scattered throughout the car. None of them seemed to notice what was happening. Or if they did, they didn't care. I sat down near the door, clutching my bag tightly. He didn't sit this time. He stood, leaning against the pole in the middle of the car, staring at me like it was the most natural thing in the world. His eyes were dark, unblinking. I couldn't stay on the train with him. I had to get off. But if I got off, would he follow me again? What if no one else got off at the same stop? What if it was just the two of us? The next stop was coming up. I stood up before the train even began to slow, hoping to make it look like I had been planning to get off all along. When the doors opened, I stepped out quickly, walking briskly toward the escalators without looking back. I could hear footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate. He wasn't trying to be subtle anymore. The platform was nearly empty. I saw a man in a reflective vest, a worker, probably, and I headed straight for him. I didn't care if I looked paranoid. I just needed to get away from this guy. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "Can you tell me where the nearest exit is?" The worker looked up from whatever he was doing and gave me a quick nod. "Just up the escalator, to your right." I glanced back, and the man who had been following me had stopped a few feet away, standing still in the middle of the platform. He wasn't looking at the worker. He was looking at me. His expression hadn't changed. I thanked the worker and hurried to the escalator. My heart was racing so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't look back again until I was outside, standing in the cold air under the harsh glow of a streetlight. He wasn't there. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to catch my breath. The streets were quiet, but there were a few people around, enough to make me feel somewhat safe. I called a rideshare and stayed under the streetlight until it arrived, keeping my eyes on the station entrance the entire time. The man never came out. I don't know if he stayed on the platform or got back on the train, but I didn't see him again. I've taken that route since then, but only during the day. And I don't sit near the doors anymore. I don't let my guard down. Not after that. The night started like any other. I had been at a friend's birthday party in the city, and it was getting late. I don't drink much, but the idea of dealing with the subway at that hour felt exhausting, so I ordered a rideshare to take me home. I'd done it dozens of times before. It felt normal, safe even, to just pull up the app and let someone else do the driving. The car that pulled up was a black sedan, the kind most drivers seem to have. The license plate matched, and the driver, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a friendly smile, waved as I approached. I opened the door and slid into the back seat. The interior smelled faintly of air freshener, something pine-scented, and the radio was playing quietly, some soft jazz I didn't recognize. "Hi, are you Emma?" he asked, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "Yeah, that's me," I replied. "Great. Heading to Maplewood Lane?" "Yes, thanks." He nodded, and we pulled away from the curb. For the first few minutes, everything seemed fine. I scrolled through my phone, responding to a few texts and checking the news. The streets were quiet, the kind of calm you only get in the city late at night. But then, I noticed something strange. We weren't heading toward the main road I expected. Instead, he took a turn onto a side street I didn't recognize. At first, I thought maybe it was just a shortcut. Drivers do that sometimes to avoid traffic or get around construction. "Is this a faster way?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately, just gave a vague, yeah, something like that. His tone was casual, but there was something about it that felt off. I glanced at my phone, opening the rideshare app to check the route. That's when I noticed the tracker wasn't working. The map, which normally shows the car's movement in real time, was frozen. It showed us still sitting at the pickup spot. "Hey, I think there's something wrong with the app," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced at me in the mirror again, his smile tight. "Yeah, that happens sometimes. Don't worry about it. I know where I'm going." My stomach tightened. Something about the way he said it felt too casual, too dismissive. I watched the streets more closely now, trying to figure out where we were. The buildings were unfamiliar, and the further we went, the fewer streetlights there were. I think you missed a turn," I said, my voice a little firmer this time. "Nah, this is better," he said. "Trust me." I didn't. My heart was starting to race now, and I could feel my palms sweating. I opened the app again, trying to re-enter the destination, but it wouldn't update. The car's motion wasn't showing at all. It was as if we weren't moving. "Can you please just follow the directions in the app?" I asked, trying to sound calm but assertive. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, "So, you live alone out there, or you got roommates?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. It was so casual, but the implications made my skin crawl. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. He glanced at me again in the mirror. "Quiet type, huh? That's okay. I get it." I forced myself to speak. "I think I'll get out here. I'll just walk the rest of the way." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Out here? There's nothing around. It's not safe to walk at night, you know." The street we were on was empty, lined with warehouses and the occasional parked car. No houses, no stores, no people. He slowed the car slightly, almost as if to tease me, before speeding up again. I reached for my phone and called the emergency number listed in the app. Nothing. The call didn't connect. It was like my phone wasn't working at all. I tried calling 911 next, and thankfully, it started ringing. The driver noticed. "Who you calling?" he asked, his tone sharper now. I didn't answer, just stared at the screen, willing someone to pick up. The ringing seemed to go on forever, and I felt the panic rising in my chest. Finally, a dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency?" "I'm in a rideshare, and the driver isn't taking me where I need to go," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know where I am, and the app isn't tracking the ride." The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror, and his smile was gone now. "Who are you talking to?" he asked, his voice tight and angry. I ignored him and kept talking to the dispatcher, describing the car, the driver, anything I could think of. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and that they were sending help. The driver's knuckles were white on the steering wheel now. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," he said, his voice low but tense. "I was just trying to make conversation." "I want to get out," I said firmly. "Let me out of the car." He didn't answer. Instead, he sped up, taking another turn onto an even darker street. My heart was pounding, and I could barely breathe. I reached for the door handle, but the child locks were on. I was trapped. The dispatcher was still on the line, trying to keep me calm, but I couldn't focus on their words. All I could think about was getting out. Then, as we rounded a corner, I saw headlights ahead. Another car was coming toward us. Without thinking, I started banging on the window, yelling for help. The other car slowed as it passed, and I saw the driver staring at us. The rideshare driver swore under his breath and slammed on the brakes. "Fine," he said sharply. "Get out." I didn't wait for him to change his mind. As soon as he unlocked the door, I threw it open and jumped out. I stumbled onto the pavement, my knees scraping against the rough ground, but I didn't care. I ran toward the other car, waving my arms. The driver of the other car rolled down their window, and I breathlessly explained what had happened. They let me into their car and drove me straight to the nearest police station. The rideshare driver was caught a few hours later. Turns out, he wasn't even an official driver. He'd stolen someone else's account and had a history of similar incidents. I was lucky to get out when I did. It's been months since that night, and I still can't bring myself to use a rideshare app again. I keep thinking about what could have happened if that other car hadn't been there, if I hadn't managed to call for help. I don't think I'll ever forget the way his voice sounded, the way his smile faded when he realized I wasn't going to stay quiet. It started a week ago, but I still can't get the images out of my head. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget what happened. I had surgery. Nothing too serious, just a routine procedure, but it left me needing a few days of recovery at the hospital. My doctor assured me that everything would be fine. It wasn't a big hospital, not the kind you see in the city, but one of those smaller ones that's out in the country, more isolated. The kind of place where everyone knows each other, and the staff are familiar with every patient that walks through the door. I wasn't worried. After the surgery, I was groggy, mostly asleep, and I didn't notice much. But I woke up in the middle of the night, disoriented, and I realized something was off. My room felt different. The lights were dim, but the place felt too quiet. Too still. At first, I thought maybe it was just the after effects of the anesthesia, but as I looked around, I realized something wasn't right. There was someone sitting at the far side of the room, near the window, just staring at me. I couldn't make out the details, but I could see the shape of a person hunched over, their face in shadows. My heart raced, and I tried to sit up, but the pain from the surgery shot through my chest. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. I wasn't sure what to expect, but the person didn't answer. They just sat there, motionless. My throat was dry, and I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I thought maybe it was a nurse or someone from the hospital just checking in on me, but the silence was unnerving. After a few moments, the person shifted slightly. I could make out the faint outline of handcuffs on their wrists. That's when the panic set in. I was alone with someone who had been restrained. That's when I heard a faint shuffle and the jangle of metal. I tried to call out again, but nothing came out. My throat was too dry. I could barely move, still recovering from the surgery, and now my mind was racing with questions. Why was someone in handcuffs here? Why hadn't anyone told me about this? The person moved slightly. I could feel my heart in my throat as I watched the shadows. I tried to stay calm, but I could hear the faint clink of metal every time they shifted in their seat. I needed help. I needed to get out of there. My instinct was to press the nurse call button, but when I reached for it, I realized the cord had been cut. That's when I started to panic. I tried to look around the room, my vision still blurry from the meds, but the silence was suffocating. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The door to my room, which was supposed to be locked for safety, was ajar. And that's when I heard it. The faint sound of footsteps approaching. My blood ran cold. I tried to force myself to stand, but the pain from my stitches was too much. Every movement felt like my body was on fire. I froze, every muscle tense, straining to hear any sound that would indicate help was near. The footsteps stopped. The person at the window was still, but I could sense their attention shifting. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, but I couldn't make myself look directly at them. My breath was shallow now, and I realized the situation was far worse than I had initially thought. Whoever this was, this person locked up and sitting in my hospital room wasn't supposed to be here. That's when I heard the voice, low and gravelly. It was like a whisper, but it carried enough to send a chill down my spine. "Stay quiet," the voice said, barely above a whisper. I froze. My instinct screamed at me to call for help, but I knew it would be useless. There was no one coming. I was alone. I don't know how long we stayed like that. The silence was unbearable. My only focus was the handcuffs, the metallic sound, the person in my room. My thoughts raced through possibilities, none of them good. Then it happened. The lights went out. The whole hospital went dark, and all I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat and the distant hum of the emergency generator kicking in. The power failure was brief, just long enough to leave the entire building in pitch black darkness. It was enough to make everything seem even more sinister. I could hear the person standing up now, moving in the dark, footsteps coming closer. I felt my entire body freeze in terror. Then the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against the floor reached my ears, and the person moved closer. "Stay down," they whispered again, this time with a little more force. I barely had time to react before the door to my room slammed open with a force that rattled the walls. Someone entered, loud, deliberate footsteps. It was one of the police officers, and I couldn't tell whether they were here to help or if they were part of what was going on. "Is everything okay in here?" the officer asked, voice heavy with suspicion, but he didn't come into the room. The person in the shadows, the one in handcuffs, spoke again, their voice shaking slightly now. "Get me out of here," they demanded, not in a whisper this time. Their voice was more commanding, urgent. "I can't do that," the officer responded, his tone firm but unsure. "You're not going anywhere." For a moment, the room was still. Then, without warning, the figure lunged forward. There was a scuffle. The sound of metal clanging, followed by a scream. I couldn't see anything. I was paralyzed, trapped in the bed, too terrified to move. I heard the officer shout, then a gunshot. The crack of it echoed through the room, but the silence that followed was worse than anything. I could feel something was wrong, but I couldn't see anything. My mind couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The officer came in finally, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, and I saw him kneeling beside me. He was saying something, but I couldn't hear it over the ringing in my ears. I was moved quickly after that, taken to another room. The doctor came in to check on me, but I was still too disoriented to make sense of it all. Later, I learned the full story. The person who had been in my room wasn't just any criminal. They were violent, dangerous, and had been caught on charges I didn't want to know. The officer had been keeping them in my room by mistake. They'd been placed in the wrong ward. The power outage had been the perfect opportunity for them to escape, except they didn't expect the officer to intervene. But by then, it was too late for me. I couldn't erase the memory of that night, the feeling of being trapped in a room with someone who should never have been there. It took weeks for me to feel safe again. And I still don't trust hospitals. The whole thing still feels unreal. But it happened, and I don't think I'll ever be able to forget it.